I just thought if I could play any role, it would be Lyra.
And how has your life changed?
I kind of think of it as two different worlds, because there's like my normal life just kind of being who I was before, and then there's all of this.
I think after the photo call yesterday, you know, with all the photographers yelling and flash bulbs, etc., I think for a moment she was like, wow, what have I gotten myself into in a whole new way. And then she started in with the roundtables, and I spoke with a couple people who said by about an hour in, it was like old hat.
I don't think she's ever kind of faced a situation quite like this. But I'm not sure how many people have anyway. It's a bizarre situation for a 13-year-old.
What's your day been like? What have you been doing today?
We've been doing the TV press interview things. It's a bit scary because it's like the first time, but it was fun.
She's just a good kid. You know, I mean, and you look at it and you think, oh, God, man, a good kid like that, 12 years old. I don't think, you know, I mean, I know that she's kind of bowled over by this whole can thing a little bit, at least certain elements of it. But you just know for a fact that she hasn't got a clue as to what's lurking around the corner, man. In December, her world is going to change.
She does 3 days of interviews here at Claridge. It's mostly television. She's also doing some press conferences and print roundtables as well. Then we take a deep breath, and on the 4th day, we go to the premiere at the Odeon, Leicester Square. And there, she'll face another barrage of cameras. The last count, we're looking at 57 TV crews will be attending, which is more TV cameras than I, certainly in 20 years of doing this, will ever have seen before.
People from all over the world have put together the junket that we're having. We have journalists from more than 35 countries. We have, I'd say, somewhere between 250 and 300 different journalists coming. For Dakota, she's done interviews here and there. She started in Cannes, but it was very small in Cannes of really what we asked her to do. And this is an onslaught of the world's press. I think she's excited. I can only imagine if I were 13, I would think this is great and just be frightened to death.
Check this out. What's that? It's a Claridge's director's chair.
If you start by saying, I think my life is going to change, then it definitely will. Whereas if you start out by saying, actually, no, it hasn't really changed and I am really normal, I'm going to stick with my friends, and that's the starting point you have to come from. Although, yeah, there is a bit of me that thinks I'm being naive as well. It's too late now, anyway, the train's left.
I'm her hair and makeup artist. I've been her hair and makeup artist since Cannes, which was back in February. It was the first time I met Dakota. We worked on the sort of launch junket that was at the Cannes Film Festival. You do tend to be a little bit like, not really a counsellor, but somebody people can dump all their baggage on before they have to go and be on, you know. But I have to be honest, Dakota's like a really cool kid. You know, she seems to be, at least at the moment, taking this all in her stride. She doesn't seem to get nervous or anxious or worked up about things. I think she's just seeing it as part of the job, and she understands exactly what job she's here to do, and she does it.
Yes, I'm happy with that. Mother happy with that?
She looks gorgeous.
Great. Right. Let's go.
Today, I think, is actually the 4th time I've interviewed Dakota over the last 6 months, and the great thing about her is I don't think she's actually changed at all. She's still a real ordinary kid. You know, she's just amazed that she's at the centre of this kind of huge film experience, but she still talks about the ordinary things she does with her friends and how much fun she's having. So even though she's now filmed 2 major movies since I first met her, she's just an ordinary teenage girl, and that's why I think people will like her.
Mum, hurry up.
The kind of questions we ask are a mix of, you know, all sorts of things. It's a bit about the film, how difficult it was, things like the special effects and everything, but also it's about her, because children who are part of our audience are just fascinated by what it's been like for her acting alongside these, you know, huge stars like Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman. It really is a dream come true. So what you're trying to do is ask questions that bring that out.
You look, there's a chair on the left. Did you catch her?
You excited?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you see yourself plastered all over every city practically in the world? Is that fun? Or do you look at pictures of yourself and go?
Depends how big they are.
Right. We're going this way.
Hi there. Hi, I'm Gina.
Hi.
I'm going to be bringing journalists in.
I'm just going to do a quick monitor check.
I want to take that seat. Okay. Dakota, this is Ward, the first journalist from Benelux.
From Belgium. How are you doing?
Good.
Hello, everybody. We have a lot of cameras today. Almost as many as on the set, I guess. When did you first read Philip Pullman's books?
How did you feel getting the part?
You seem like quite a centered person.
Would you like to have a demon?
How was it to be cast in an adult environment?
She's lovely. She's obviously lovely, and she's a fantastic actress because the performance was absolutely stunning.
Okay, so here we go again.
Now, how did you feel the day they told you you've got the role?
We'd had our kind of trial run in Cannes, so we'd had a few days of interviews, and I know the format pretty well. And it's highly unusual for there to be a question that she hasn't already heard, to be honest. What has surprised me is how well she's doing and how much energy she has throughout the question process.
It would either be a ring-tailed lemur or a white hare or a hedgehog.
Oh, hedgehog is nice. So I was a little bit picky.
So, tell me...
How are you?
I watched your first scene in this movie and I thought...
You have beautiful hair.
What are you thinking? How do you feel right now? Did you fall off?
And you're coming to Japan in December, right?
How did you, what was the...
Tough?
I'm going to wait for you there.
And,
Is it true that you started screaming on the phone?
That's good. I want to know which one you think is the most attractive.
Think about that a second. It feels good. I'm exhausted, but very, very proud. Proud of the cast and crew and Dakota.
It's the most amazing feeling ever. I mean, words can't describe how brilliant you feel inside. It's just brilliant.
How did you feel? I was glad I wasn't having to pay for it.
Tonight's just a celebration of all the people and the talent and the hours of hard work that everyone put into this film.
You have to answer children, adults, everybody.
It's a good film. It looks wonderful. The performances are better than anybody could ever expect. It's wonderful. And they tell the story. It tells the story very clearly. That's a cut above publishers' parties, I have to say.
Be the normal sort.
I do spend part of the time out of Lyra's world. I like making things with my hands. I like materials. I like wood. I like paper and pencils. I like making marks. I like cutting wood into shapes that I can fit into other shapes. I like being physically engaged with the real world. That includes the piano. That includes guitars and ukuleles and things that I can make a sound on. I'm very bad at it. I wouldn't dream of doing it in public. I also read Dostoevsky and watch Shakespeare. It's not a matter of literary quality, it's a matter of human necessity. G.K. Chesterton said, literature is a luxury, but story is a necessity.
He's a very intelligent man who has a very fine sense of storytelling, probably one of the finer senses of storytelling of the age.
His sheer sense of vitality and imagination in his storytelling was, I think, something that everyone noticed when these books came out.
In most of the countries where the book is published, it's called The Golden Compass. I originally called it Northern Lights for its publication in Britain, but I don't really mind if it's got this other title because actually all the three books can have a special artifact that sums them up. There's the Golden Compass, there's the subtle knife that we meet in the second book, and the amber spyglass that we meet in the third book.
The name The Golden Compass was a pure and simple mistake. When Philip had sent the manuscript off to America, he'd actually decided that the trilogy would be called The Golden Compasses, and the editor or publisher in America misread that as The Golden Compass, and he thought it was referring to the alethiometer, which does look like a compass when you see the drawings, and he thought it was a much better title.
I think The Golden Compass was sort of Philip Pullman's coming out party. It started as a British phenomenon, and then it grew around the world. It went to the States, and it worked. It went to Germany, and it worked. It went to all the European territories, and so it grew and grew and grew. It worked everywhere. He has run out of space for all of his awards and prizes and acknowledgments.
The Carnegie Medal is the for a children's book, it's the ultimate prize that you can win, because it's chosen to be the outstanding book of any given year. The Carnegie Medal was founded in 1936 and first won by Arthur Ransom. And so last year in 2006, it reached a big anniversary, and they decided to celebrate 70 years by looking at what was the best ever Carnegie book. And the shortlist actually did go back well into the 1930s, but Northern Lights won the Carnegie of Carnegies.
It's like lots of different lands. It's really imaginative, and I think the characters were really well developed, and I loved it.
I was reading it like all day and all night. I couldn't stop, and then one day I went to bed at 1:15 in the morning because I kept reading it.
I think it's really, really, really clever.
I started telling stories to my friends and at school, and these were stories that I'd heard from other places. I heard on the radio, or I'd read in books or something. Ghost stories that I particularly liked. They always went down well. And I don't think there was ever a time when I thought I would do anything else, really. I was always going to write stories.
I first met Philip when he was a teacher still at Westminster College in Oxford. He was running a summer school, and he did a session on graphic novels, which is one of his passions. I walked into this room, and I knew that he was going to teach it, so I had done a little bit of homework, and I'd started reading the Sally Lockharts. And by the time I left that room, I realized that he is a wonderful teacher.
If you think of it, lots of successful children's writers have been teachers. I think of Enid Blyton, C.S. Lewis, Tolkien. And one of the virtues of teaching is you have to learn how to present your material. And Philip was taught in 3 schools. One he describes as posh, one as middle class, and one as tough, all in the Oxford area. And, every teacher knows the problems of teaching on Friday afternoon when the kids are getting sort of restless and so on. And he said that's when he learnt to tell stories to a group of people.
I never actually had any difficulty getting published. The first book I submitted to a publisher was accepted and published. I think if you can write a page that's sufficiently interesting for the person who's reading to want to turn over to the next page, you're halfway to being published already, because most people can't do that. But it was a very long time before I wrote anything that was noticed. That was a book called The Ruby and the Smoke, which was a sort of Victorian thriller. And it was about a girl called Sally Lockhart, who was 16 in 1872 and who found herself at the heart of a sort of murder mystery and all this sort of stuff. And I really enjoyed that story. And I wrote 3 more books with Sally in them. Those books attracted a bit of attention. But that was until 1985 that I published the first Sally book.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Welcome to the press conference for the Golden Compass.
1993, when I had lunch with my publisher. It wasn't a very good lunch. Sausages and mash, I think. But it was good to talk to him, because we were talking about what I might write next, you see. And I said, well, I could do another Victorian thing. I got a new idea for one of those, or I could do this, or I could do that. And he said, yeah, that sounds all right, yeah, but what else have you got in mind? And out of nowhere, because I'd just been looking again at Paradise Lost, which is something I've returned to throughout my life, I mentioned this. And David Fickling, the publisher, said, well, I love that as well. Because we talked about being at school, and the book we both studied was Paradise Lost, parts 1 and 2, books 1 and 2. And we sat there over lunch exchanging quotations and citing ourselves with our favourite lines and all this business. And by the time the lunch was finished, I'd sort of suggested to him that I do a modern version of Paradise Lost. And that's all it was, just a sort of updating of Paradise Lost. And we got no further than that. And then I went away and thought about this and realised that what I'd committed myself to had to be a fantasy. And I'd never written fantasy before. I'd written sort of fairy tales and things that were not in the real world, so to speak. But I'd never written a full-blown fantasy before, partly because I don't really read fantasy. I'm not a fantasy fan, and I didn't really expect to find myself doing that. And I was a bit disconcerted at first, because I didn't know how to make this interesting. But then I realised I could actually play with it and make it whatever I wanted to. There weren't any rules. I could do exactly as I wanted to. So I set off writing this story, which was going to begin, as I realised quite early on, with a little girl going into a room where she's not supposed to be. And then someone comes in and she has to hide. And then she's trapped there for the rest of the evening because the room fills up with men who are talking about something big and important and dangerous. And she's listening to all this. And I thought, that's a great situation. So that's what I found myself writing. And then the idea of the demons came to me. It wasn't there from the beginning. It was something that came after I'd written several drafts of the first chapter and it wasn't working. It wasn't working because Lyra needed someone to talk to, basically.
Monsters? I don't know. It can't be the normal sort. They got plenty of that here.
Then I realised that I got hold of a story, almost by accident, in which I could talk about something that had been interesting me for a very long time, which is the business of growing up and the difference between being a child and being an adult and what you go through in the period of transition and so on. And this was my story because innocence, the innocence of Adam and Eve before the temptation was childhood, and then the temptation comes and they go through that and they emerge on the other side into the experience of adulthood.
I want to see the icebergs and glaciers and learn about dust and everything.
What do you know about dust?
Nothing.
Good. Keep it that way.
The reasons I did this is that I'm a huge fan of the books. I mean, this first and foremost, there's no getting away from it. There are no gaps in his story. Everything joins together.
I just like the way it sort of takes on so many aspects of life like science and religion and love and hate and emotions and everything and the parallel universes. And I really like the science aspect.
I really liked the story and I went to see the play of it as well. And after I'd seen the play, I just thought, right, if there was any part in the world that I could play, that would be it.
I love the idea that the National Theatre was bold enough to tackle this, because to take something that is an epic 1,400-page story and distill it down into 2 parts for the stage is an incredible undertaking. But I never doubted that it would be successful here because Philip has such a devoted following here.
I've always loved the book. I want to be Lyra.
She's quite naughty.
Scruffy, dirty, untidy, dishonest, untrustworthy.
She's really adventurous and stuff, and she's just everything a good person should be.
Me?
Except she lies a lot.
She's brave too. If she makes a promise, she'll keep it.
You know, we just call her good, and then you just called her naughty.
Yeah, but she's naughty but good. She's mad and she's kind of normal.
She's a bit like me, really. It's really amazing.
She's got quite a different personality from normal people from that time that you see in movies and stuff. And quite mischievous and stuff. Yes. So.
What do you think?
I don't know.
Because I'm not, as it were, seeing it from inside Lyra's head. It's not written in the first person. It's possible for me as a 60-year-old man, or 50 or whatever it was when I started, to write about a young girl. Because I'm not imitating, I'm not impersonating a young girl. I'm writing about her, like a camera looking on, if you like, from the outside.
For me, I wanted to wait to see where Philip was going with the His Dark Materials trilogy. Northern Lights wasn't enough. It was just the first part of the story.
The Golden Compass appeared in 1995, and I think that took about 2 years to write. Then 1997, we get The Subtle Knife, and then in the year 2000, you get the Amber Spyglass and the culmination of the whole trilogy, and that's of course when he begins to be recognized as the writer of this fantastic epic.
There were 2 very important events that I think allowed me to successfully get this film made. And the first was that The Amber Spyglass won the Whitbread Award. And when Amber Spyglass came out, I think the world acknowledged that this was an extraordinary achievement on every level. And so the Whitbread Prize was unusual in that it was the first time the major prize was given to a book that had been characterized as a children's book. And it was the adult prize.
You move out of the sphere of children's writing when you become a Whitbread winner. And this is judged by your peers, so it's other writers who are judging you as having produced the finest book of the year.
So this was newsworthy in itself, and I think it made some of the people in Hollywood who were skeptical about this, I think, more convinced that it had widespread appeal.
I had read the books during Christmas of 2000 and fell in love with it. And then the following year, in January, I had lunch with Philip to talk to him about writing an original screenplay and directing it for us. he said, why don't you talk to Deborah Forte, who controls the rights, about His Dark Materials trilogy? I said, but I thought those were already taken. And he said, no, they're not. So I went back to the office, called up Deborah. A week later, I had lunch with Deborah. I brought a colleague along with me in New York. That afternoon, we started negotiating, and a week later, we got the rights.
Having Philip Pullman's trilogy, the Dark Materials trilogy, was one of the best calling cards I ever could have had.
There's no one that's been on this movie longer, other than Philip Pullman, than Deborah Forte.
When we started this film, Bob Shea from New Line came to the set and gave us all T-shirts. And on the T-shirt it said, "It's the materials, stupid."
It wasn't inevitable that it would be made into a film. It was a possibility. It was, there might be some money in it for me. Who knows? You know, I've been poor for most of my life. I'm always happy to have another chunk of money offered to me. And I thought there's no requirement that every copy should be withdrawn and burnt just because a film's made of it. So I wasn't worried about that at all. And as James M. Cain, the writer of what became that great film Double Indemnity, the Billy Wilder film, he wrote the novel on which it was based. And somebody said, aren't you worried what they do to your book when they make a film? He said, they do nothing to my book. There it is on the shelf.
These are books that have affected me really deeply, and the last thing that I would ever want to do is to do a version of the film that falsified or did a disservice to Philip's take on things. That's how much the books matter to me. And it's been a really positive part of this experience to meet kind of one of my literary heroes, and to be able not only to meet him, but to kind of co-create certain aspects with him.
One of the many benefits of shooting the film here in the UK was we had physical access and proximity to Pullman. So he obviously was consulted and talked to throughout the sort of development process. And during the production process, he visited the set. He was aware of scenes that we were shooting. And oftentimes, we'd get a scene that we liked, but that maybe was missing some facet, or there was a particular puzzle or challenge to it that we felt we couldn't crack. And in those circumstances, Chris Weitz, the writer-director, would often ask us to reach out to Pullman, and he would either look at scenes that we had, little 2 or 3 page scene that wasn't quite working, and sometimes we would have a scene that we knew we wanted to shoot, we wanted to create, but couldn't really, beyond knowing what we wanted it to contain content-wise, couldn't find our way into it. Sometimes we would simply ring him up and say, listen, we want a scene where Mrs. Coulter, you know, and the Golden Monkey have a moment, blah, 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 and, you know, do you have any thoughts in that regard? And then he might sort of go away and come, you know, email us 2 or 3 pages, or something like, how about this?
There's a scene which isn't in the book, but it could have been. And I wrote a scene in the film where Nicole Kidman, playing Mrs. Coulter, is with her demon, the Golden Monkey, and something provokes her and she hits her own demon. Instantly he's resentful, but he wants comfort as well, so he comes to her and she sort of pats him on her back. So we see her dual nature there. I never realised this was possible until I wrote that scene. So I'm still learning new things about demons.
I think the author's like really clever to invent all those creatures, and it's basically like inventing a whole new world.
There's so much adventure and excitement in them, and there's loads of characters that you think you know, but you don't really know them at all until the end.
All the creatures are just so amazing, the armoured bears and everything.
Lyra first comes face to face with one in this scruffy backyard in dirty little run-down town at the edge of the Arctic Circle. And he's so impressive, he's so big and so dirty and so smelly and so powerful and so rough. She falls in love with him. And he turns out to be the bear who should have been the king. Now, when I first thought of this, when I first realised that this dirty, stinking bear in a back alley swinging spirits out of a jar, when I thought, well, I could make him the king of the bears, I thought, no, don't do that. No, it's too much, it's too obvious. But above my desk, I've got a little piece of paper that says, do not be afraid of the obvious. Because I think there are some things that come to you in stories that have to be there, and they seem too obvious. And if you were really clever, you would avoid the obvious and do something different. But don't be afraid of the obvious. Do the obvious thing. Sometimes the obvious thing is the best thing to do. And in this case it was. Yes, he was the king of the bears. Yes, he had been tricked out of it. Yes, and Lyra can help him get his throne back. That's part of the story.
Thematically, The Golden Compass is about coming of age, the acquisition of intelligence and wisdom.
The overall feeling is there, which is that human curiosity and knowledge is a wonderful thing. Human cooperation and kindness is an essential social attribute. And against that, we've got harshness, bullying, lies, and cruelty.
He doesn't give you answers. He just tries to give you a kind of desire to think about these things and to come to some kind of way of behaving that will be constructive rather than destructive.
People keep describing this story, saying it's an epic adventure tale, epic fantasy adventure tale, and it is that, but it is really the story of a girl.
It's about Lyra. It's about Lyra who, it's about the consequences of curiosity. She goes into the room where she's not supposed to be. She overhears something she's not supposed to. She's curious, and everything follows from that. And in the biggest possible sense, the sense of the whole trilogy, it's the consequences of curiosity, the consequences of wanting to know more. Because, like Paradise Lost, it's a retelling of chapter 3 of the book of Genesis, which is itself, like the whole Bible, like the whole of our culture, it's about the consequences of curiosity. What happens? Eve is tempted by the snake, not because he says it'll taste nice, not because he says it'll make you sexy, but because he says if you eat this, you will know more. You will be as gods, knowing good and evil. Curious, so she eats the apple, and it's the consequences of curiosity. Is that high concept enough?
Quite extraordinary that when people read these books, they say, when is that? What's the date? Is that turn of the century? Is it the future? Is it the past? They're not sure. And then they find out that it's a parallel world.
It's a beautiful and interesting undertaking to try and come up with something that is a parallel universe, an environment that's new, interesting, exciting, stimulating for all of us to look at.
We're in the art department. This is where the most fun stuff is made. It's just why I really like coming here. It brings out the 10-year-old boy in me. Here's where the amazing look of the film is created here under Dennis's watchful eye. You usually don't want to say something like this, but I do think that Dennis is the key to the whole movie, really. He's the single piece that kind of makes the whole thing work.
What I was thinking, having a big foreground element, maybe would come around.
One of the extraordinary things about him is even though he's, Academy Award winner, he's also tremendously adaptable. I know I can just ask for a corridor on a week's notice and something will appear that is absolutely gorgeous and realistic and fantastic. And I know that the degree of detail will be absolutely tremendous, which is something that I'm very keen on, that there should be a redundancy of detail.
Philip created an environment that was vague enough that it allowed you to interpret. And that was the fun part for me, was if it was a very specific, this is going to be red and this is going to be blue and green, then what do you need me for? Because it's already stated.
I'm made welcome here, but I also have the sense that this is not my world, and rightly so, because the story that I wrote is finished. I've done it. I played my part. I've now handed it over to Chris and his team, to Dennis and his people, to make it look like this.
How many people are involved in the art department?
Millions. There's a large staff in the design department, and of course in the construction department, and set dressing and props and visual effects. But I'd like everything to be in this room. Well, it all starts in this room and then it spreads out.
We've made probably the best part of 1,000 items just on action props alone. Every day is a challenge. You've got to keep on your toes. Every set has probably got a piece of furniture in there that we've made. It's not bought or hired.
At the moment we're on R and S state, and K and B, and we're on our back lot as well.
There's a lot to look at here. There's, when we have zeppelins, we have all kinds of carriages and flying balloons and bears and skyflies and boats, and it's great fun.
I read the script in California and said, how are we going to do this? And Dennis had actually been working on this 3 months prior, and he said, well, when you get over here, I've got some ideas. And he'd spent 3 months with a team of concept artists. And I got here and was simply amazed by what they'd come up with. They were about halfway through it, and it was a really, really, really varied world. Fantasy, obviously, but it went from English, Victoriana, to Art Nouveau, to very sci-fi, modern cityscapes, to Svalbard and Norway and the North Pole. And literally everywhere in between. It was huge.
The conceptual artist side of this was the beginning. We came up with a presentation to show New Line how this movie should feel and look, and is about translation. A translation of what we would normally call something that you would understand into something that is a different vernacular. It's a new signature, if you will, into looking into another world that seems familiar, but it's not familiar.
Dennis Gassner started with the idea of Lyra and her world as this pure place. So to sort of take that into a visual metaphor, he came up with the idea of the circle. You know, a perfect circle. A circle is a pure form. And this will be cool when you're watching the movie. If you look closely in the production design of Oxford, you'll see the circle represented in a number of ways. The spirit projector that Azrael shows, the lenses are these perfect discs. The alethiometer is a perfect form, it's a circle. And you move from Oxford and you get to London, you start to see a different form, which is the oval. And the oval is an impure form. It's an impurity of the circle. And as you track his production design, when you look at Bolvangar, when you look closely at Bolvangar, you'll see that oval. Even if you look at the magisterial emblem, you'll see it. So it's a changing of the form. And in a weird kind of way, the villainy of the movie and the books is trying to change Lyra. In the same way, the perfect circle that is Lyra, that is the golden compass, that is Oxford, gets bent and changed. And I've really, really oversimplified it, but if you're looking for one sort of visual metaphor for Dennis's approach to production design, that would be it.
Sometimes Dennis would arrive with a very precise idea and he wants just that I make an illustration of it, and then we can improve it as long as it goes. And sometimes he let us a lot of freedom.
One question is about the size.
That's a good size, I think. Yeah.
We're kind of like a jack of all trades, really, and we work very closely with the production designer. You know, the look and feel of the movie all boils down to Dennis, and it's a combination of designing it and conceptualizing it. Illustration is a big key part.
The exciting part about this is that it will totally evolve, and this has been, I've been on it for a long, long time, and it has seen many, many, many paths and journeys. As people get involved, it will change, and it will change until somebody says action, and that's the moment that it stops, and it becomes crystallized and recorded.
This is a parallel world. I mean, the best I heard it put was if you took a moment in time where our world went down the fossil fuel road, and in Golden Compass, that world went down the ambaric power road or steam, you'd still have a lot of the things you'd have. People still fly, but they're in zeppelins, not in planes. They still drive, but they're in these kind of ambaric powered carriages, not in automobiles. So it's both familiar and very different, and it gives the whole world it gives it a differentness. It's not something people have seen on film.
I'm predominantly responsible for the vehicles. So, for example, something like the Magisterium carriage is a really tough cookie, because not only do you have to find out stylistically where it's going to fall, in this case, I mean, the back end's obviously, you know, Regency, but the front end's a completely new technology, ambaric technology, and that's a completely different kettle of fish altogether. You know, what is ambaric technology?
It seemed to me from talking to everybody that ambaric power was something a bit more organic than electricity that we're all familiar with. So rather than being electric, so just on and bright, or rather than being candlelight, which is a little bit softer but there all the time, and rather than being gaslight, which actually is quite similar to electric light, I thought, well, what happens if you mix all of them up?
Apparently on all the lights we've got, rather than just having a bulb, there's going to be all sorts of different colours.
What we came up with was a light that was always moving, and I never really realised the enormity and scale of it until Jordan College at Greenwich. And I went downstairs and there was racks and racks and racks of dimmers just humming away, and all these were doing with practical lights. And I suddenly realised, you know, it's one thing having a little idea in the bath one night thinking, oh, that would be a neat way of doing that, and then the reality is it's sort of all this hardware out there was a bit of a shock, actually.
Show it. You had one.
Oh, well.
Where is it? Come on, show it.
Dennis, he starts by setting up the architecture. For example, he will ask me for an interior just to work out the wall and the space, and after that he will ask me to add some furniture. Then, and already about freedom, sometimes it's very precise, sometimes we've got more freedom. It depends also as the affinity we have with the subject.
I'm challenging them and they're challenging me, to see if in fact they've gotten it right. And so if it's not, then I shift them and guide them to a point where it feels right. And when that moment is right, it's very exciting for everybody. It's the release of energy.
I've been lucky to do a little bit of everything because I'm not specialized. It can be environment, interior, the props, everything in fact. And well, the result is wonderful.
Thank you, Virginie. It's great stuff. Thank you.
The people who have worked on and read the books and worked on the project, they've come to the project because they've loved them and they wanted to work on them. I'm fleshing out that for them. I'm trying to help them discover what my take of the material is at this point. It's something that director and I have discussed, and we've looked at things and we've all agreed on the emotional fabric, and now it's just getting the fabric made.
Our stage, we've got a bedroom that is part of a composite set that we're also working on location. K stage will go the North Pole, and H stage 2 sets, the Egyptian encampment, and then we revamp it to exterior Bolvanga.
From the plans to the models to the physical full-size build is always exciting. It's nice to see it happen. It all seems to happen very quickly and all at the same time. So you spend a lot of time physically moving at tremendous speeds around from every place. So it's the busiest time.
I'm talking to the director, a very important phone call.
Dennis has got incredibly high standards. He does not accept second best. He at one point said to me, that'll be fine with a faux finish. And then you realise that he's never going to accept that. You've got to produce the real thing. If it is in steel, it's got to be in steel. If it's in brass, it's got to be brass. Aluminium, aluminium. So all the brass castings have been produced by us. Every light, all of the lampshades. And we've had bed frames and bed heads that we've made, which were in Lara's bedroom. That was made, I can't remember how many pieces that it was cast in, but the guys worked on that. I think it's for 7 weeks, solid.
Then it's on to the next thing from a prop making department's point of view. It was like, right, that's one down. Next.
Bingo.
We've produced the spy flies. That was a real big sort of challenge for us because they're very slick and very highly engineered, but very, at the same time, very organic and natural.
I made out this drawing. It worked in my head, but in my head also, it would have made in CG. Then in CG, everything is possible. But no, they needed also to make it real. Then they have had to interpret what I was doing. And those guys are really fantastic artists.
Chris and Carl have been working on the mechanics of it, so we wanted to make one that was practical so we had some movement on, and another one which was effectively a beauty shot. So Chris has made up this radio control rig, which can give us interactions for coming out of the box. So we can give the CGI guys the initial lift to get it out of the box, and then from that it becomes a CGI world, and we don't see it again.
If you don't actually make it perfectly, it looks rubbish. So it has to be precise, and there's no room for shoddy work really. But the spy flies have to be absolutely perfect. They're mint, and I think everyone's really pleased with those.
Miss Lyra, are you ready to fly?
Here we have the start of Lee Scoresby's balloon gondola that hangs under the balloon.
This is my hot air balloon. This is Dennis Gassner doing what he does best.
Once we've got the drawings and the conception from Dennis, we tried to attack how we're going to build the thing. A company called Tubecraft produced all the right curves for the machine from the drawings, and then we started cutting it up and forming it in place.
The whole of the balloon ultimately is scaled off the back of the bear. So if the bear was going to be the size of this room, for example, it was going to be a huge air balloon. And how does the bear get in it? You've got to think about the practicalities of the thing. Because, it does work, supposedly.
The structure you see is around about 1.8 metric tons. It can bank at 45 degrees if necessary. The actual controlling of the gimbal is done by another model, which is a direct replica of the gimbal itself. And the person who operates it actually gets hold of it, and wherever they move the model, that's where the gimbal will go.
I must say I envy, almost more than anyone else on a film set, I envy the people who make the props. I love making things. That workshop with all those tools and all that nice new wood and the metal and all that stuff. I'd have a ball there. I would really love it. I really missed my vacation. I shouldn't have been a writer. I should have been a prop maker for films. I would have enjoyed it more than anything else.
Props on these films, you can't find them. You can't go out and find them. They're not in the shops or the high companies. They don't exist. And the only way of creating those is by making them, getting them drawn, concepted, and made.
No matter where you look, or even you just kind of pan very quickly over someone's desk, you don't know that there are magisterial directives and maps for routes to Svalbard and all this kind of thing on the table, but they're there. They're absolutely there.
You're trying to build up a character. In this case, it's Mrs. Colditz, to give her the feeling that she is that character. You have to give her as many props as you can. This is her travelling case. This is what she goes off to Bolvanger in. You know, so she has her checkbooks, a few bills that she's obviously got to pay on the way, her journal, which is obviously very important to keep in touch with what she's been doing, headed paper, envelopes. For every 10 items we make, you probably see 3. So sometimes it's quite upsetting when you know that you've made, for instance, 50 backpacks for the Egyptians, whereas in reality, you're only going to see 15. And you feel for the people that have sat there making them for 6 weeks, but then if you didn't have them, we'd be in more trouble. So we have to make sure that the guys on the floor and the director has things to play with. He has to have some toys that are kicking around.
You've got an arrow firing machine, boys, haven't you? Could it be set to be, hit here and fire like a flatter trajectory?
Basically, this is a special effects shot of arrows propelled by compressed air. This is going into a stuntman that is fully protected. There's obviously an element of danger, so at all times you don't load this cylinder until the very last second before they're going to turn over. It's like doing a bang. You don't make it live until the camera virtually starts turning. 3, 2, 1. Oh, misfire! He had no padding on.
We are in the H stage at Shepperton, which is sort of our multi-purpose north stage. It's where we're shooting the Egyptian encampment. That's where we shoot Bolvanger here. We also shoot some of the North Pole here. It's being redressed repeatedly because it's the biggest stage they have here. So this is one of our most exciting sets, certainly.
It looks phenomenally good. It looks fantastic. There's this huge open space, Arctic vistas, the ice-clad mountains hundreds of miles away, and it's all in this one big building. Astonishing, really.
We've done all the snow here on H stage. We've put approximately 90 to 100 bags down here. That's probably getting on for about half a ton. It's a bit like papier-mâché, so it sticks to the floor and it sticks to whatever you sort of see around you. So as you roll it up, it's wet, so you can actually make snowballs out of it.
The Egyptian encampment is an amazing thing, worked on by props, by set dressing, by set design. And something, by the way, they've been building this for months now. We've been on this stage for 2-3 months building this. Everything to the lighting grid up above is something that took, a great deal of time to put together just so they could light it a certain way. Or the cyc around the whole stage is, painted for the last 2 months. It's an amazing sort of opportunity to actually see everything come together. And I'd have to say that we're proud of it. I mean, this is a good, a big action sequence. We haven't made a lot of action movies, and this is not an action movie, but this is one of our days where, people get to kick some ass.
So, boys, remember the safety once more. Remember the children, look after them, and it'll work good. Here we go. No risks, no rush, and action!
At the moment we've got 25 armed Egyptians and 20 Trolliston police, plus 4 main artists with guns, and then this afternoon we'll have that again and about another 35 Egyptians. So there's quite a lot of weapons out today.
With the weapons, the initial brief was make me weapons. Find me designs and just make me beautiful weapons. When you start to do that, and the money just runs away because you're making, if you think about arms manufacturers, they spend millions. So we came up with a supplier that could come up with weapons that have not been seen on camera before. And we utilised what they had. We decorated some of the Egyptian weapons. And we just offered items up and had people accept them.
These are real things. This is a real that's a real thing. That was for shooting people out of the rigging.
The knock was a copy of a weapon that was produced for firing at people boarding ships, knocking them out of the rigging. And it's effectively a scattergun, 7 barrels, which go off at once. And it's basically a cannon. We tried to use predominantly English or European weapons for all of the show, apart from for Lee Scoresby, where I desperately wanted him to have this weird and wonderful gun, which he was very keen not to have.
So where's the Colts?
He's a cowboy. He is the man, and he's saying, "Look, I know what a cowboy is. I know what a cowboy has. I want that. I don't want that gun. I want that one."
I heard classic, iconic American cowboy too many times from Chris Weitz. I'm open to as much conversation as we want to have about this, but there's nothing American about that weapon.
He was right, but we hope that Lord Asriel might end up with his old weapon, so we'll see.
Let's not be too hasty.
This is Trollicent. That's the Magisterium right there where Yorick breaks in to get his armor out.
What can I say? It's all beautiful, except for that hole in the wall.
This is, to me, sort of the coolest thing I'd seen. I mean, our production designer is amazing. His first movie was Apocalypse Now. He was an assistant, like a young associate of Dean Tavoularis. He did the portfolio that is in the movie. He did all the handwriting and all this kind of stuff.
This opportunity to come here and work on this film, one thing that I will cherish forever is that it's reunited me with someone that I was very close to in proximity, I'm speaking. Never knew, but now I know him because of his career that he's amassed, and that's Dennis. We went to the same high school in Portland, Oregon.
Now we're in trouble.
We worked on a Coen Brothers movie, The Big Lebowski, and I met him there at a cast and crew screening for the film, but never had an opportunity to really speak with him. Yesterday we shared a meal together, and he is a lovely man and a brilliant talent. You know, I mean, you look at this structure here that was the backdrop for yesterday's scene, and it's mind-boggling.
This is a very good set. I think this is absolutely exactly as I pictured Trollicent, this little Arctic town. And it does look so convincing. You could sort of live in any of these buildings, really. You could go and have a drink in the bar. You could, buy some corn or whatever is over there, and so on. And if you go behind them, it's flat sheets of wood with being propped up in the mud. That's the amazing thing about film sets: how quickly they are built, how solid they look, and how quickly they vanish. So they look as if they've been here from time immemorial, and they're completely ephemeral. Amazing.
I give an environment to explore, and the exploration takes place in the day of shooting. And it's a marvelous group of people here that take it from paper to reality. But I think, have a good plan. And if you have a good plan, in most cases you can react to the difficult moments. And the moments pass. It's just a problem to solve. You solve it, and then it moves. You move forward. To get into something else to solve. This is the incision machine. We're going to move it from the paint department to its home in the operating theater. Bollinger was an interesting one because it went through so many permutations. I think I redesigned it about 12 times, but morphosized itself into something that I think actually was quite interesting. The practical thing is, how would they get it there? How do you get something so large into a place that's so remote? And so I realized that it had to be some sort of a modular form, that almost a kit form in a sense of how you build something, how you recreated it. And so we came up with this modular technique that informed us of the elements of what Bollinger would become.
To anyone who's read the books, Philip sets up a very complex, multi-layered, very rich fantasy world. Sometimes it's quite thoroughly fleshed out in terms of what it's supposed to look like. Sometimes it's left to the imagination of the reader, and obviously when you're adapting a novel, especially when you're adapting a work of imaginative fiction, you have to make very specific choices in a film which don't necessarily have to be made by a novelist. So The key was, in terms of the look, to try to hew as closely as possible to the spirit of what Philip wrote, and to represent as best we could what we thought Philip had in mind. And you know, that involves a lot of contact in the early going between me and Philip, in terms of me running things by him, his making suggestions, sometimes his querying the choices that we've made, and it's a kind of a dialogue that ran through the pre-production period. The best thing to do is to hire Dennis Gassner, really.
Anna and I are sitting here waiting for the incision machine to arrive on the operating theater set in Pullman. So what do you think? Are you excited?
It's great. I'm very excited. Very excited.
And here it comes. For me, it's creating the minimum that's necessary. And the excitement for the process for me is, you know, obviously going from paper to reality and seeing the dimension of all the things that come from all that planning. And the excitement for the crew is that they get to come onto another environment that they've seen in imagery and they've seen in bits and pieces. But then when it's finally finished, and it's usually the day before we shoot, you know, invite our director and director of photography, and they come over and they get the energy of all of that hard work. It's just a little snip. It's just a tiny little snip. It's a complicated film. You know, we've had a lot of dialogue about everything, every little detail. So it's really about communication, and that's what we do. I mean, that's what this medium's about, is about talking and dialogue, and it is a big family. You create a big family. We're all part of it, and we all, as they say, fight the good fight.
Dennis has done an extremely wonderful job in conceptualizing, in terms of the production design for this film, a world that is both familiar and unique.
I'm glad to be a part of it. It's been incredibly stimulating, exciting. I think it's kind of manifested a lot of the things that I've done in my career. You know, it has so many facets to it that make it very special to me. You know, I've sacrificed being away from home for a year, but that's part of the adventure that I go on as a designer. And as a creator, I think we you know, it's what we enjoy about films, is the adventures that they take us on. And, you know, along with Lyra, you know, this has just been that kind of adventure for me too.
It's one of the key.
Fight well, Garrett, my dear. You're the real king and he ain't nothing.
It's one of the key scenes of the book. It's one of the key scenes of the movie, and it has to be right. The job is to convey on screen the sheer frightening brutality and violence that takes place when two bears fight each other.
There were always very, very high expectations for what this would be. And it was always going to be an incredibly difficult thing to achieve. You know, it's fully CG, 100 bears, all wearing armor, two bears fighting, and fully CG photoreal. That's a pretty tall order.
That is sort of the pinnacle of both creative and technical complexity for us in the project. If you want every complicated thing to happen in a bunch of shots, that's where it's going to happen. It's 100 shots.
Is that all?
It was 6 months animating the whole sequence.
Is that all?
It's so complex, it sort of blows your mind.
Yes, that is all.
When we approached the bear fight, we built a foam core bear arena. We had little stand-up bears, about this big, and we had a lipstick camera, which is a video camera that's about the size of a lipstick. So we literally, with the lipstick camera, blocked out the whole fight. Then we cut it together and we had a bear fight. And it's hilarious. It's really funny because it's very hokey.
Who is your king?
And then Framestore CFC took that and did a rough animation of the entire bear fight.
That saved us weeks of blocking and animation, and for us that made things easier. We knew heads up early on how many shots were in there, what was involved in them. Some of the big shots you just sit and go, okay, it's 120 fully furred bears in suits of armor and two heroes smashing about in the middle. Those parameters didn't change from day one to the end of the project.
First thing I did in my bear studies was I arranged to go visit with a specialist at the Royal Veterinary College. And he took me around, we looked at bear skeletons, and he gave me some papers and drawings on bear musculature and things like that. And I asked him things like, if bears had the power of speech, if they could actually, could they speak? Did they have enough range in their vocal cords? Did they have the structure that would actually allow them to form, you know, something you could detect as English or some other language? And he said, yeah, they could. They have the physical apparatus to do it. So I was happy knowing that.
I am an armored bear. War is the sea I swim in.
You want Yorick to seem very much like a polar bear, but then there's the problem of how a real polar bear actually walks, and the fact that a real polar bear doesn't actually talk. So when you animate a polar bear's mouth, let's say, you know, we've all seen it in kind of commercials and that sort of thing, where animals are made to speak. It's usually in a comic vein, but this is quite a serious character, and he's meant to be seen as very formidable, very dangerous, and not somebody to be laughed at all.
What kind of work is that for a Panzerbjorn?
Paid work!
So the question is how to make his speech believable. So, well, you hire the best people possible. Framestore, CFC have done an amazing job in terms of just building this bear from the ground up.
We did the whole anatomical study. We measured the whole skeleton up. We built all the muscles and everything. We built a real polar bear. First bear we created, everyone felt he looked too monstrous. He had a lot of shaggy hair on him and he looked quite threatening and scary. And so the initial reaction was, no, we've got to cool him down. So we gave him a shorter haircut, we groomed him, he started to look more charming and princely. So that was a period that we went through with the bear design. We then kind of looked at it, reviewed it, put it into shots, and actually, luckily, I believe we did the right thing. Mike came to us and just said, hang on a second, we've got to dirty this guy up. He's a down-and-out drunk, covered in grease, and he's an alcoholic when you first meet him. We've got to rough him up again. And so for us, it was fantastic. It was, okay, we'll put away the princely bear, and here comes the real bear.
One of the first questions was, how big is the bear? And these bears are Panzerbjorn. They're not polar bears. Polar bears live up in the Arctic. We know what they look like. Panzerbjorn are warrior bears, but based on a polar bear. So how big does it get? And of course, in the book, Lyra rides Yorick. You get a sense he's really massive, really huge. We tried all kinds of different scales. For a short period of time, we had a bear that was 18 feet tall when he stood on his hind legs, and when he was on all fours would have been about 7 or 8 feet tall. First of all, we couldn't fit it in the sets. I mean, Dennis Gazzard's designing sets and locations, and quite a bit of it was all CG, and we'd have to build it. But the scale of everything we had to build around the bear to contain a bear that big, and all his buddies, because at some points in the movie there's 100 of these things in a shot. It was insane. So we scaled the bear down. Yorick wound up being 11 and a half feet tall when he stands up on hind legs. When he was down on all fours, he'd be exactly eye level with Lyra so that they could speak to each other directly as equals, which really helped in many ways. And the difficult part was making sure that when Lyra rode Yorick, Yorick felt massive enough, and she didn't feel like she was on a hobby horse. There was a lot of concern initially that we'd made the bear too small. But when you watch Lyra on the bear in the movie, I don't think you get that feeling at all.
From the outset, the design of the bears was very different. Yorick was supposed to be very sleek, like a polar bear, kind of sort of slender. And then Ragnar was a kind of bulked up polar bear. But he's just like this kind of Mr. Universe of the bear world. He's just huge compared to any other bear.
Well, in the movie, the bad bear is called Ragnar Sturluson. It's one of the things that fans of the book are going to send me death threats about, because in the book he's called Jofur Ragnarsson, but Yorick and Jofur were close enough for me that I found that I felt we should distinguish in terms of the consonant and vowel sounds as much as possible. So he's Ragnar. And in the book, again, he's presented as the largest ice bear that Lyra has ever seen. In other words, he's bigger than Yorick, who up to that point we have seen as kind of the most badass creature in this world. So how to build a bear that makes Yorick look relatively small? Well, we based his body and his musculature more on that of a grizzly bear, and grizzlies are much more square of build and square in their faces than polar bears, who are quite angular. We made him bigger, which was one way of showing that he was bigger. His movements are a little more sort of sinuous and sly than Yorick's, and Yorick is very straightforward.
And he's got these smaller eyes sunken into this huge head, which is quite good for a baddie as well. He's kind of, it gives them a certain intensity. So for us it's great, we've got these two really distinct characters that we can play with, and when they come together in the fight, it's just fantastic. Good guy, bad guy, you can really play up the differences.
The prop making department is like a workshop for the whole film. So there's a lot of visual effects elements that we've done. We've created lots of, we created the bear armour for visual effects or visualise the bear armour in 3 dimensions from concept drawings. The bear's armour was created in a small maquette form, probably about this big, that then got approved, and then we got asked to scale it up so it can be scanned. And it's probably 6 weeks sculpting work on it. We sculpted up a full-size bear, and then we literally sculpted the armour on top.
The thing is, we've made something, but then visual effects will completely change it. We will never see our armour on set, on screen. It's purely for visual effects to effectively cut and paste elements to get the colour and texture, and that's all it's for. We don't see any of our bears. We've made 4, 6, 7 bears, and we don't see any of them on screen. They're all just done for the computers.
We had a number of physical Yoricks available to us. We had a large polystyrene bear that was on wheels, that was on all fours, was Yorick size. And we used it primarily for lighting reference. We got a real polar bear pelt. The property master, Barry Gibbs, purchased one. They're difficult to get legally. You can get them illegally, but nobody wants to do that. And we would drape it over the form of the bear, sometimes with armor, sometimes with not, depending on the scene. We would roll it in front of the camera and record what real polar bear fur looked like in the lighting in that scene at that moment. And so it was a lighting reference. We also used it as a scale reference for camera lineup.
What they done ain't right, I know, but if you fight, you'll kill them.
But we had 2 other tools that we used more often for that, which were inflato bears. We built a Yorick on 2 feet, standing vertically, and a Yorick on all 4s that would inflate. So they were portable. They came in little boxes with a little fan, and you'd bring them out to the set, you'd plug in the fan, and there would go Yorick. And that helped the director of photography and Chris and me would line up the shots. We could let a little bit of air at it and let it slump over. If we needed it sitting down, we could actually kind of make it look like, shape it so it was sitting down. And because they were so light, they could be moved, so the prop guys who were handling the bears could shuffle it around in front of the camera so we could see how it fit in different places. So we didn't have to have millions of preformed foam bears that took up, tons of warehouse space ready at any moment. We had our 2 inflato bears.
If you defeat him, I will become your demon, but you must defeat him in single combat.
Also, we had to establish eye lines for Dakota in all the scenes with Yorick or Ragnar. Tommy was our puppeteer. He had these leg extensions, which are these sort of circus pogo stick leg things that he'd bought. And then I had made for him, Barry made a rig, which was a backpack with a long extension that went back up over his head. At the very top of that was a little foam bear head. He used it primarily, actually, as Ragnar, and it's fantastic. And it worked beautifully.
That was one of the funniest things I've ever seen on the set. It was like skin-tight lycra green pea-man suit. I thought he looked like a skinnier version of the Incredible Hulk, but without the purple shorts. Even though he looked really stupid, he did help a lot. Have him killed any other way, and I'll just go out like a light, and you'll never have a demon.
Prove it. Ragnar had to be not only kind of the heavy, as it were, a bad guy. I mean, he's a bit of a thug, but he's also terribly clever.
And how has he exiled the unworthy Yorick Bernison obtained a demon?
And Ian McShane, who's voiced Ragnar, has done just a beautiful job of conveying this dangerous, conniving criminal.
If you are his demon, then I will kill you right now and be free of an enemy.
Ian McShane recorded quite early on an amazing set of dialogue. I mean, for Ragnar, it was just fantastic. He was utterly over the top. We got the video reference, and it was very inspirational. We also had the opportunity during the project to actually re-record some dialogue with Ian McShane, and they even amped up the volume one more time. But the great thing was, by that stage, we'd actually animated an awful lot of the sequences his character played in. So he got to actually see the images and really see where the animation was going. And the same thing was true with Ian McKellen. When he came in to do the recording for Yorick, we'd actually blocked out an awful lot of animation. So again, Ian McKellen had the opportunity to see the timing and sort of weight and sort of postures that we were achieving in Yorick's animation, and that helped guide him. But again, he's such a cool actor. He added something that we couldn't have dreamt of.
To fight him is all I want.
The guys who are going to be doing the computer animation of the bear have to be like actors themselves, and in that sense, you're directing their performance, fine-tuning and tweaking every single shot in which you see the bear. So there's a back and forth that kind of goes on in terms of every twitch of his muscle over the course of months, and in fact sometimes over the course of a year, really.
It's a very complex set of character performances wrapped in an awful lot of technology. When we talk about the project, we say we did the bears, but we did the bears and the whole world that they live in as well, and you tend to forget. So you've got a whole digital environment, you've got to work out how to render all the ice, all the snow, how to have the qualities of reflection of the bears as they stand on the ground. All those things are really subtle cues to try and build a sort of realism into what's going on. I mean, it feels like a CG feature film. There's elements of live action, but in a lot of our sequences we just take over, and the only live action element is a little girl who is shot on a green screen stage. Everything else in the image is generated in a computer.
It is. I think it is pretty ambitious. For the crew size we've got, we've done a really good job, I think, and trying to be clever, trying to get clever solutions to some of the bigger problems. I think the fact that for us the characters are wearing armour and chainmail, which have to interact with each other, and the bear's fur and the bear's skin, has been a tricky thing for us to deal with. We get the raw animation, which is done here, and then once the animation's signed off, we can start doing our job, which is to create a sense of fat and wobble and muscle and skin moving on the bear, and then how the fur behaves as well. So we're looking at how the fur reacts with the chainmail or with the armour, so to give a kind of realistic feel.
I work with the effects team developing a lot of the secondary effects, the environment interaction and environmental effects. It involves things like footprints that the bears leave in the snow, snow which is kicked around by the bears, the way that the bear's hair moves, blown by the wind, brushing against armour, and various of those kind of more subtle elements which kind of give the film its kind of more polished look. The things we're adding to this shot are the dynamics of the fur. So as he lands on the ground, his fur is going to compress against the ice to give us some interaction. It also blows in the wind, and we also have these claw marks which are clawing into the ice. Gives you that sense that he's actually in the environment. This is one of the first projects where a hairy creature has actually been armoured or is actually wearing any kind of clothing at all, and the collisions with the armour and where the armour presses down on the hair, I think is really kind of groundbreaking for this area of effects, which has been developed specifically for this project.
I think that right now Yorick, the character, is on the forefront of what can be achieved in terms of creating an entirely digital character. I mean, I think that that Gollum in Lord of the Rings was sort of the first example of a CGI character whose emotions could be interpreted and felt in the way that you would with a human actor. And I think that this is a parallel kind of achievement.
When we were doing a lot of the shots where Yorick meets Lyra for the first time at Einarsson's bar, and there was just a moment in a shot review that we did with them where suddenly everyone just talked about him like a character or an actor. He wasn't a computer-generated image anymore, and that was so satisfying. People just talked about him like an actor, and for us, that was the moment where we'd hit the spot.
That is all.
Film that brought great joy about the music process. It's one of the last things that comes into the film process and finishing a film that brings the greatest value.
I've been dreaming of doing such a huge epic movie. I've always dreamed of that. Scoring a movie like John Williams, Jerry Goldsmith, all these Herman, Waxman, all these enormous composers which I cherished when I was 15, and that gave me the love of movie soundtrack, because they were symphonists, but still using their craft and talent for cinema, which is my second passion. When this movie came towards me, I was really thrilled. I dreamed of Jurek, but still, I'd never done such a big, huge, epic movie. So how do you get there?
In casting Alexander Desplat for Golden Compass, I think Chris Weitz, our director, and the producers and the filmmakers, knew that we had to have a great score. And who's on deck? Who's ready for this sort of thing? And it's a bit of a gamble when you go to somebody who hasn't done exactly what you're asking them to do. But you have to pay attention to the other scores they've done. And Alexander's done some tremendous work. I worked with him on one of his first U.S. studio films called Birth, also with Nicole Kidman. In 2004, and he had just come off of Painted Veil and had been nominated for a Golden Globe. And I met him at the time of the Globes in January 2004 and immediately fell in love with him as a person.
Alexander had done an amazing score for Birth, and I think he is kind of the next big thing. Maybe he's the current big thing, I'm not sure. But it was obvious that he was ready to do one of these kind of big blockbuster type movies, and we sat together and talked about the grand symphonic scores of the big epic movies that I really loved, of David Lean, for instance. And Alexander was on for the challenge of doing something which had to vary between very light incidental and funny interactions to this grand kind of cosmic scale of things.
I think the work of a composer is mainly up there, more than here. That's the first step, because once you found up here what's the direction, this goes very fast. The first brief was to embrace the 3 books and try to share with Chris and the producers what kind of themes we could embrace. And the first question you can ask yourself is, will I go to a motif system like Star Wars or Lord of the Rings or Raiders of the Lost Ark, all these movies where the themes are recurring to characters. And since we were in this childish environment, even though it's an epic fantasy, the main character is a child going through these various countries and lands and people, we thought that we had to give a perception of who they are, where they are, and how this little girl was hitting one by one these people and these places. So we have the cowboy, Lee Scoresby. We have the Egyptians. We have the Samoyeds. We have the Tatars. And all these places like the palace, Ragnar's palace. The Bolvangar. So each of these places, people or character have their own theme. The good point is that she's going to the Arctic Pole, and the more you go up there, the less people you meet, because it's a desert. Flute, because of dialogue again, and close-up of the little girl talking, we might need to bring down vibrato and dynamic a little bit.
Lyra and Roger's theme is really, it's the most kind of nostalgic and pretty of the themes in the movie, because that is the simplest relationship in the movie. It's two childhood friends.
Hurry up, Roger, else I'll gobble you!
For Lyra, she has three themes. The movie starts with her theme with her friends. It's the very moment when she's happy. It's the opening of the movie where you understand what is her world. Her world is a world of fun and of no rules, and bonding with all the kids of the neighborhood. And then we have Lyra and Roger, which is how is she going to save Roger from Bulgaria? That's her quest. And each time we're going to go near Roger, or they will meet again, this is the theme we will embrace. And there's a third theme of Lyra, which is when she has the courage to stand up to the Tatars. Also when she rides the bear, which is not something that anyone can do.
Very soon after we wrapped principal photography, we got into the nuts and bolts of, let's bring Alexandre on. We've moved him over to London. He's Paris-based. We started turning over the picture to him late March this year, 2007, and he's been working on it for 6 months.
There's lots of work, like a sculptor or a painter. You can dream and think, but there's a moment you have to hit the canvas or hit the marble. It's the same here. There comes a stage where I have to write notes, on a pad, and I spend a lot of time at the piano, dreaming, searching, exploring, just to create the world of the movie. And it goes from this, Lyra's theme, with the chords on the top, and it becomes a very precise mock-up, demo. And every instrument that is here will be played by the orchestra. If they are flutes, it will be the same motif on the flutes. So you see, it's very near from, if you would compare with the real orchestra, the orchestra would just be gorgeous, because this is just machines playing, but it's exactly the same thing.
An orchestra, a big orchestra. On our first day we had 119 pieces, which may have been the record. We're trying to check and see if we broke yet another record. And in order to create the worlds of the Egyptians and the Samoyeds and traveling north and Lyra's journey, we're also bringing in ethnic elements.
The Western orchestra is the basis of the music for this. Still, Pullman manages to synthesize and hybridize so many elements from different cultures and different walks of life that it was appropriate here.
Almost.
This reminds me of an oboist in Bulgaria.
This movie in particular has such a wide range of possibilities. It's a world that does not exist. And all these elements put together create a different world, which is what I had to do. That was the brief. Let them ring again.
I quite like the ringing myself.
Yes, but it might be too messy, the track.
That's the
Too
thing.
messy, yeah. I understand. Yeah.
We have to check into the
Yes, of course.
track if it's too much.
Yeah. But that can be done.
Because the alethiometer has this mystical power, we very early thought with Chris Weitz, each time the alethiometer is present, that we could use Tibetan bowls. The experience I had is that on tape, you quickly lose the tonic and you just hear the overtones. Because they are very resonant, it allows a melody that is very simple and very slow to shine and resonate. I mean, you can hit a ball and go have a sandwich, come back, and it will be still ringing. Yeah, that's perfectly the way you should do it. Yeah, when the new note, you hit the new note, yes.
It never fails to amaze us all how excited people get when you bring in unusual instruments and unusual textures into a score. Everybody gets excited, like, kids on Christmas morning, ooh, what's this doing? Whoa, that makes a great sound.
So off we go.
It's amazing when you hear the music, which has been recorded with a 120-piece orchestra, mixed in, layered in by professional mixers, and you're in the perfect mixing stage with surround sound. The movie is just completely reborn, and eventually it's down to the audience to judge sort of how that all works. But for me, it's immensely satisfying, and I'm incredibly grateful to Alexander.
I must say, to be composer and conductor and be in front of all these people, you have to have some nerves. How dare you? And I try to achieve my work as best as I can when I come there. But having the orchestra in front of you is just a reward. It's the real reward, because at last you hear it. We like it here. We're happy. Good.
You're working on something you really... We are about 4 weeks away from the first day of shooting. We are, depending on how you look at it, 2 years into pre-production, or maybe officially 2 months into pre-production, which means we've been casting, we've been designing costumes, production designing, building sets. When I say we, of course, I don't do any of it. I just sit around. I mean, talented people who are paid to do it. Everything that goes into making the film, we spend months on sort of getting it ready so that everything's just right. And all indications is that, in spite of my best efforts, it's going to work. I should be wetting myself, but I'm not yet. Yeah, every once in a while I'll see something that really makes me realize that this is a big movie, and I'll be in big trouble if I waste all the money. I first became aware of his dark materials when I was shooting a film in London with my brother. Some friends recommended them to me. I hadn't heard of them before, and I just devoured them. I thought, these are works of genius. And I knew that the next thing I wanted to do, if I was going to direct again, was to direct The Golden Compass, if it was ever going to be made. It seemed like a very difficult proposition to make this film. So I wasn't sure anyone was going to go ahead and do it, and eventually New Line went ahead and decided to consider making it, and I kind of threw my hat in the ring.
Once we secured the rights to the books, we went after a screenwriter because we thought that was step one, and we did a first round of screenwriting with Tom Stoppard, who's most famously known for Shakespeare in Love and really great British theater and just a really amazing writer. We went a few steps with him, but ultimately as the development evolved, we sort of realized that you really did need a director. And when you're looking for a director on a movie like this, you sort of go to the immediately obvious, defensible ideas. Who would all be great? We had meetings with Ridley Scott, we had meetings with, all kinds of big filmmakers.
And as various more renowned directors fall out of the picture for one reason or another, you become you just sit there at the bottom of the barrel waiting for it to be scraped. And sooner or later, there you are. I think that I made it as clear as possible to New Line, who were willing to listen to me, how much I cared about the books.
It was not an obvious call, but the strongest thing Chris had going for him in terms of his vision and selling himself to New Line was his incredible strength as a writer. He knew the books on his own trajectory, had read them, and had been strongly moved by them. So he was very gung-ho, and he really pursued the gig predominantly to direct, but once he was on board as a director, it just made sense, since he tends to write what he directs, to sort of put him on as both.
The task of adapting something like this, a 400-page novel, to a film is a really interesting exercise because certainly one can't capture everything in a 400-page novel. And so very important decisions had to be made about not only what to do in the film, but what not to do in the film.
The first version of the script I'd written was 186 pages. And your average film script is probably somewhere between 100 and 110. So it was a gigantic film. And I got it down to about 156 before I handed it into the studio, but still it was going to be a massive undertaking. And that created a problem for me as director because I thought, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how anyone's going to do this. And I realized that it would take over the next 3 years of my life. I mean, I just broken up with my girlfriend, so I was kind of on my own. I could see the film kind of eating my life, and also the technical challenges, which were, you know, all the green screen and the VFX and everything just seemed to me kind of personally insurmountable. So I sat down with New Line and said, respectfully, I don't think that I can do this. And they were very understanding about it, and they kind of let me off the hook.
He signed off 3 days before I was supposed to fly to Fiji for my honeymoon. I was gonna drop kick his ass. But what are you gonna do? But then luckily he stayed on as writer, which maybe on some level he knew his commitment was such that he couldn't just step away entirely.
And so for quite a long period of time I was the writer, and Ann Tucker was on as director. He was someone who was equally kind of passionate about making the film, and I think he would have made a great version of the film, actually. But eventually, he and New Line couldn't end up agreeing, I think creatively, or in terms of the size of the budget that it was going to be accomplished under, and so they parted ways. And then, in the interim, I'd had about a year's time to, you know, go through the sort of period of regret that you have anytime you make a big decision and you think about things might have turned out differently.
And I think by writing and rewriting and continuing to see the movie shaped, he saw that he actually didn't give himself enough credit. The truth is, as he got closer, he realized it was possible, and he'd written something great, and he should direct.
So suddenly it was possible again, and they took the perhaps unwise decision to offer it to me again. And I met my wife also, so my life was a bit more, I had actually had a life to go home to in the rare moments when I wouldn't be working on the movie. So I thought for about a week and said yes, and so my wife, who was then my girlfriend at the time, and I moved to England on a week's notice in order to take on the production, which was already partly in swing. So really I arrived to kind of a mountain of things to be gotten on with. And since then it's just been a kind of a marathon.
I think so far so good. You know, I think he's having a good time. I think he's glad to be back on the movie, and it's all about surrounding him with people who know the things that he may not have done before, and that makes it a lot easier for him. So I think he's doing very well. I'm just excited. Everyone wants to start shooting.
This is day one, the Park Lane Hotel. This is the point where I realized that I can't pull out. It's too late, and the next 6 months of my life are going to be consumed with this film. But it's also, you know, after 3 years or so of effort by a lot of people, the time when they finally get to you know, put it down on film.
Can I take my name, cameraman?
I feel we are at the perfect point of preparation, and any more would have been pointless. So we had to start at some point.
We are definitely ready. This is a very big movie, but we do have the best people working on it. This is day one of 100 days, so we're just going to get through today.
The first day is always a bit weird, and you hope you have an easily achievable day, which we do. So talk to me at the end of the day, and I'll be really upset if we haven't gotten what we needed.
Chris is very smart. He's obviously written the script, so he knows what he wants, and he's also very kind and very polite, you know, so he's got this, and I'm very polite too, so between the two of us, we're like, hello, yes, okay, you'd like me to do that? Sure. But I think that, you know, you feel his support and you feel his desire for you to be good, and that makes you want to be good for him.
The first time I met him, he decided that he was going to play the bear, and so he stood up on top of the sofa and was going, "Raw, I am a bear." And I was just like, okay, you know, I've never met you before and you're really scary right now. I think because he's such a relaxed person that he kind of makes everybody else relaxed, and I mean, he never shouted at anybody ever, and you know, he's just a really nice person, and he makes you feel good about, you know, the way you're doing things.
It's all about getting the performance, getting the shot, doing the work. And he does that when he's on set, I think, with a great degree of confidence. And so the idea that Chris might not be experienced enough for this movie really wasn't ever an issue. And he's getting what we need and what we want.
There are elements of movie making and of contemporary movie making, which means digital movie making to a great extent, that I wasn't cognizant of, and that originally really scared me. But it all eventually comes down to the same thing, which is you show up in the morning and you shoot your particular bit of footage for the day, or you talk about what a particular VFX shot is going to be, and you put it together bit by bit. I mean, making a movie is a process of very slow accretion. You know, you shoot about 1 day for every minute that's going to show up on the screen, and it's a lot more tedium sometimes than it is glamour or excitement, which is good because you know that it's really about maintaining concentration and attending to details.
Cut! So this is just a little party that was put together by the office people. It's our halfway celebration. This is day 45 of 93, so it's not really technically halfway, but it's a Friday, so people can try to recover over the weekend. I suppose I feel surprised to still be walking and talking. Very pleased with how far we've gotten, and excited at the prospect of someday having a life again.
I think what Chris does, and I think a lot of directors do, is they're able to look at the beginning of the movie, let's say how many days there are, and in their mind build up the stamina to make it those amount of days. He's tired, but he knows he's got the reserves to make it through, and the enthusiasm doesn't wane, but there's never a moment's rest. Ideally when he gets home, I hope. Not being there with him, I can't tell, but I hope that he's able to sleep a bit.
For a director, it's about taking years of your life and dedicating it to one enterprise. I mean, really, people know who work on films of this size that there is nothing else in your life when you're doing something like this. It's all consuming.
It does involve a huge kind of right turn in the way that you're going to lead your life. You wake up at 6:30 and work into the well into the evening every day in order to do it, and a lot of other things and personal obligations go by the wayside. But it's worthwhile, and this will sound cheesy, but it's worthwhile because when you feel you're working on something you really love and you are working with very talented people, it feels good. It's the way to work.
I feel very old right now. But very grateful to be working with all of you. There's no place I'd rather spend my birthday than in a disused Victorian water pumping station with such an excellent bunch of people. Thank you so much. Thank you very, very much. I'm
90% of the job is picking the right people, and Chris was the right idea. He's incredibly affable and incredibly calm, and that's a good quality in someone making a $180 million film.
It's a tremendous financial responsibility, at least the way that I was raised. If you're spending somebody else's money, you have to be very accountable for it, and also sort of trying to keep the motivation and morale of about 500 people, which is the size of the crew on this when everybody's all counted up. That's difficult as well, but that never really bothered me because the cause is just. The thing that really got to me, actually, is reading fan reactions on the internet sometimes, which I have to keep myself from doing. Because, you know, obviously some people were in favor of my doing the film. Many people are not, because I did American Pie and About a Boy, and nothing in my resume kind of indicated to people that I would be able to do justice to these books, except for the fact that I've often stated that they are my favorite books. So foolishly, I would occasionally at night wander the internet, and it would give me sleepless nights. I think I barely beat out No One in terms of the choice No One in terms of who should direct his Dark Materials when it was on a poll. I hope gradually through engagement with the public to show them that I'm treating the series with great care, but in the meanwhile I've had to try to avoid surfing the net.
I think he's the man for the job, and it sort of was never an issue. I mean, he's had to adapt it and therefore understand it a great deal before he's actually got to set to start directing it, which I think is essential for a movie as complicated and as out there as this movie is.
The fact of the matter is that there have been hundreds of people working on this just as hard as I have, and this is not the kind of film that really fits in with a kind of an auteur theory of filmmaking, just because there's so many elements and there's so many people have to be working together at one time to do it well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you all. It's been such a pleasure to come in every day and see your sunshiny faces. I thought that making this movie would drive me insane, but far from it. It's been a tremendously stabilizing, wonderful experience, and I miss you all already. You know how it is. We'll miss each other, but we'll be glad not to have to come in. Hope to see you all again.
Cheers, Chris. At least for me, the number of movies that are worth making are really, really few and far between. I mean, I went 5 years before directing this one, and it was the only thing that I wanted to do, and that's it. I mean, it was the only thing that motivated me to get off my ass and direct again, because I think these are terribly important books, and they're certainly really important to me.
Okay. Yep. I'm Dakota Blue Richards. I'm 11 years old and I live in Brighton. I always used to pretend that I was something. When I was little, I used to pretend I was a cat by tying a feather boa to the back of my trousers, and then at the end I'd pull it out and go, "It's me all along, didn't you know?" Just because I thought I was so good at it. But then I wanted to do plays and proper acting when I was about 6 onwards.
This is going to be your first day on camera. Are you a bit nervous?
Yeah.
Yeah? And what's the scene? Tell us what the scene is, what you have to do today.
I'm eating in a restaurant. It's one of the Mrs. Coulter things.
Mm-hmm. And you've met Nicole, haven't you, a few times now? Is she cool?
Yeah.
There's such a fan base for Philip Pullman's book that it's important that kids feel that we've opened up the doors for them to be considered. And that's another important part of these open auditions, to just throw the net as wide as we can.
So that everyone had a chance to
be thought of. And every kid who's turned up to these open auditions, we've seen every single one, and we're quite proud of that.
We're here to audition for the part as Lyra.
We're from Leeds, but I've been acting since I was 6, and I love the Philip Pullman books. Northern Light is one of my favourites.
People like Lyra, and they recognise the situation she's in.
not the literal situation, but the situation of being young and not knowing what the grown-ups know. Because the grown-ups all know some big secret that she doesn't know.
She's always looking for adventure and she's very confident.
She's really loyal to her friends and stuff. And like once she said she's going to do something, she's going to do it. She's determined and she's normal.
For Lyra, we were looking for someone who didn't feel like a child actor. She's described as a savage by Pullman. She is unlike a lot of characters in children's literature. She's not naturally inclined to do good.
She manages to be like a liar, but still be a really good person.
So Lucy Bevan and Fiona Weir went through the really hard work of looking at literally thousands of young girls in various open casting calls throughout the country.
I thought there'd be a lot of people, but I didn't think there'd be, like, this many.
I'm really, really nervous. I'm really, really excited.
My mum said that we weren't going to go along if it was raining or anything, so it was good that it had good weather.
Possibly we wouldn't. If we'd have woken up at 7 in the morning and it had been horrendous weather and the trains were all messed up, we might well have said, let's not bother.
We held 4 open calls in different parts of the country, Oxford, Cambridge, right up in Kendal and down in Exeter, and publicised them, you know, sent out the information, the age group of kids we were looking for, and waited to see what happened. And on each occasion, a lot of kids turned up.
I expected quite a lot, but not as many as this.
My mum's friend, Jude, was ill and she was watching BBC Kids news round. She came round to our house for dinner a couple of days afterwards and she told us about it.
It so happened that it fell within the Easter holidays. And I thought, you know, Cambridge is a nice place for a day out. Let's go.
OK, ladies and gentlemen, if I can have your attention, we are going to now open the queue. Thank you very much for your patience, and we look forward to a successful day. Thank you.
We got here at about 7:30.
We had planned to arrive at 6:30, but we overslept.
I was really tired because I had to get up early.
We came up this morning, got me out of bed at 7.
When we finally got there had been people sleeping there overnight, and so there was a really big queue, even though we were like one of the first people there.
I think we're probably about ready to go in and meet Lucy and Fiona, who are casting today. So, are you excited?
Yes!
No, you see, I said, are you excited?
Yes!
Are you ready to go in? Yes! Follow James here, and let's go, quick as you can. Quick.
We had to wait in the queue for about 3 hours before you got in. You went in groups of 50 to 100.
We had to say our name and our age and where we were from.
Some of you got your picture taken, and some of you were asked to read something for a camera.
I want to see the Northern Lights and ice bears and glaciers and everything.
They took a photo of me and then they put it on and they told me to come through into this room and learn the lines of Lyra.
It's one of the scenes in the book or the movie that we're just reading through.
I had to go and read a script to the camera and then I don't know what's going to happen now.
They take you to a farm and they fatten you up and then they slice you open and eat you.
An open casting call can be very risky. One can spend a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort and not find the right girl. And ironically, the first call, which was in Cambridge, had the most extraordinary girls turn out, which makes sense in retrospect because all of the most passionate fans of this material would have traveled any distance to get to the first call. And Dakota was one of them.
She walked into a room with probably 20 other girls and she stuck out.
Lucy and Fiona put about 40 or 50 of the girls on tape for us. And we looked at them and it was one of these wonderful moments where all the planets converged. I saw it and picked out 5 girls, and Dakota was one of them. And then I sent it to Philip, who was very anxious to see these girls just to get a sense of who they were, just as a piece of information, actually. And he called me within about 48 hours and said, I think it's one of 2 girls. And I said, well, Philip, we haven't even gone to the other locations yet. And he said, but I think it's one of 2 girls. And I said, okay, well, let's see.
Apparently something like 10,000 girls came and applied, and did the first sort of run through the casting call and so on. And we were shown some of the DVDs of the little auditions they'd done. And they were so good, all of them. But, this one was too young, it was too old, and this one's too tall, and that, all that stuff. But all the way through, Dakota was the one that stood out.
We went on holiday for a week after that. And we didn't hear until a few weeks after we'd got back. And yeah, they just said, we've recalled you.
And what happens is that you gradually sort of whittle down through more and more, through bringing her back and testing them more and more.
And the more that Dakota came back and the more work she did, the better and better she got.
At the first auditions, I just thought, well, I'm going and I'm probably not going to get it. And, so there's no point in even getting nervous. And then at the second one, it was more like, oh, actually, there is a chance and it is time to worry.
Don't be afraid.
With the auditions, every single step of the way was like, oh, wow, she's been called back. And each one was, in and of itself, I thought, the kid's 12. If she's been called back for this it's going to be a huge film, and she's got down to 40, how fantastic is that? Of course, by that point, you're desperate for them to say yes. But we were just really happy that we'd even got that far.
They called us up and said, there's been a change of director, so you'll have to wait. You could be waiting up to 6 weeks before you hear her again. And then about 2 weeks later, they called up again and said, no, it's all right, the new director likes her as well.
I came in when we were down to about 40 likely candidates, and then went through kind of one-on-one auditions until we got it down to 8, and then down to 2.
I'd had a bad day at school, and I came home, and my mum was all like, they said that we have to wait for a call because they might be calling us.
The actual call, I knew before they called.
And the phone rang, and Mum goes, it's them.
I couldn't believe that anyone would have said to me, we're going to all give you a ring in the afternoon, and it's going to be all of us on the phone, and you'll need to have it on speakerphone, and it's going to be good news.
It was Chris, and he goes, can you put it on speakerphone, please? And so she hung up on him because she doesn't know what to do, and they had to call us back. And then, when they finally did tell me, I was really excited and I didn't know what to do, so I screamed and I did the Snoopy dance.
Action!
Usually when children are starring in big movies, it's an ensemble of children like Harry Potter or Narnia. She really has to carry this movie, and she's just 12 years old. She has never really acted professionally before.
They were taking a massive, massive risk. I take risks in my job, but I don't know if I'd have taken a risk on some 12-year-old kid.
The first scene that I ever did was with Nicole. Thankfully, I didn't actually have to say anything, and it had lots of people in the scene, and so I was at a table surrounded by loads of people that I didn't know, and then she was sitting next to me and I had to act like I knew her, but she was just like Nicole Kidman to me.
It's always a little bit intimidating, I think, for a young actress like Dakota, whose very first moment on a film set was with one of the most accomplished and beautiful and sophisticated and knowledgeable actresses in film. But Nicole was very generous with Dakota. I think Dakota, it was a great scene for her to get her feet wet because she didn't have too much dialogue. And we also had this wonderful opportunity to put some extras in the scene, and we're able to put her mom as one of the diners.
Dakota put it to me. She said, well, how would you feel if you had a part in the film? So I sat in a fine restaurant with a fine artichoke in front of me, chatting to a fine gentleman. And when we were coming back in the car, I said, so what was the best bit about today? And she said, I've got my own chair. I've got my own chair. And the other funny thing about it was I said, yeah, and I noticed that Nicole sat in her chair. They had a kind of break for 5 minutes. And she walked up and she said, that's my chair. And I said, I bet no one speaks to her like that. And she moved her out of her chair because it's my special chair.
She's in every scene, so she's, astoundingly good in terms of being able to have the stamina, because that's what it is a lot of the times. To be
carrying a movie like this on your shoulders. But she's got a wonderful mother and she's got a sort of a support system around her. And Chris, the director, is very protective of her and very kind to her, which is important, you know, because she's still a little girl.
We are making the bum frappuccino.
I think it was a really valuable experience coming in as we did, as A, normal people, and B, she's a child, because we got to know the crew in a way that I think other famous actors don't get to know them. We felt more in common, obviously, with the driver than we did with Nicole Kidman. I mean, you know, that's what our life has been like.
Here you go, it's the last bum frappuccino. 2 straws.
I'd like to think that I was friends with pretty much everybody on the set, and I spent a lot of the time between shots dancing with the sound people.
I saw her on a screen test well before we started, and it was very obvious to me that she had to be the part. She had to be playing Lyra.
No!
I have to be perfectly honest, I've never seen a James Bond film in my life.
She's learning every day. I mean, she's a different girl now than she was when we first started shooting. She's professional now.
He's fun, but not kind of naggy. I don't know, that's the thing I like about people, when like they don't cling to you.
She's got this sort of feral look to her, which I think is absolutely bang on for the part. She's going to hate me, she's going to kick me for saying this. She was going, what's feral? Very nice, very pretty.
Daniel Radcliffe gave her a really good bit of advice when she met him. They sent us up to the studios when she met him, and he said, I'll give you a few bits of advice. You need to always listen to your mother, which I thought was really sound advice, obviously. And you need to keep people around you who will tell you the truth, and you need to never forget how lucky you are.
You're a special child, Lyra.
I don't want acting to be like my only job. I want to do a job and then do acting when I found a role that I really wanted to do.
It's a mixed blessing to be offered a big part like this, because you are going to become a celebrity. That has its nice aspects and its terrible aspects. Your life and your image are thrown open to the world at large.
That's it for Dakota team.
The thing that will be difficult is when the publicity hits, and that's the bit that I can't even begin to conceive what life will be like.
I hope it hasn't changed me as a person, but I think it does make you more confident about like your acting ability. And it was sad at the end because you have to leave everybody and you're like so close to everybody. But there's still another 2 films, and hopefully it will be most of the same people, and then, you know, it will be fun to work with them again.
Things will never be the same again.
Our animation team who...
When I first wrote the first draft of the first chapter, I wrote it 14 or 15 times, and it wasn't working. I didn't know what the reason was, but I knew it wasn't working. Because you see, at that point, there were no demons in the story. I hadn't thought of demons. Lyra went on her own into this retiring room. She saw something happening that she shouldn't see and so on, but it wasn't coming alive, and I didn't know why it wasn't coming alive. Something was wrong. So I was fooling about one afternoon, and I wearily took up a piece of paper and I took my pen out, chapter 1 for the 16th time or whatever it was. And then I found myself writing the words Lyra and her demon. Demons had never existed before I wrote that word, and I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know what the demon, what the relationship with Lyra was, except that in some sense he was her demon, and it was spelt differently from the usual demons we know. So it didn't mean, you know, like a little devil, it was something else. So anyway, I read the rest of the sentence to see what they were doing, and the rest of the paragraph to see how it worked, and it was much better now. It was much better because now that she had someone to talk to, the scene was much more dynamic. She could say, let's go in there, and he could say, no, we're not supposed to, and she could say, oh, come on, you're just a coward, and he could say, well, very quickly then. You know, so there's a dynamic going on, there's a conversation going on.
I wish you'd listen to me once in a while.
Stop being such a coward.
If I weren't such a coward, where would you be?
In the retiring room already.
When I first thought of demons in that first time I discovered them, everybody's demon changed shape, adults as well. But I soon realized that if everybody's demon changed all the time, it would get boring and I'd have to say what they were doing and why, and it didn't mean anything. And then I thought, well, supposing children's demons change, but adults don't. And in adolescence they settle down. And that was the point at which the whole thing became clear to me. And I realized that I'd got quite a big story to tell.
Hush, Pan.
I see your demon still changes shape. Hasn't settled yet.
Yeah.
A child's demon changes shape essentially according to whim. I mean, I suppose in a way it represents how a child's moods and a child's thoughts are very quick and changeable, and also the infinite potential of a child, whereas adults are much more set in their ways. A child doesn't know exactly what they're going to be or even what they're going to be from moment to moment. And so, you know, rather than make a big deal and have a flash of light every time a demon changes form, it just happens very, very quickly and I think very elegantly, in a way that seems completely casual and normal to everyone around.
Let's go get him, Lyra.
They are human. They're a part of the human being in Lyra's world. So, no, the last thing we really wanted was for them to be talking animals, although that's what, on the surface of it, they look like. And it was a very agonized over and heavily thought out process to figure out how to render them with Mike Fink, our visual effects supervisor, and Rhythm and Hues in terms of how to portray them.
I think that's okay, because I think Azrael's Azrael, so he gets a really big demon.
We've already done a year's worth of research about demons, which ones we would use, who we would give to whom, how many we're going to build. How many different varieties of animals we're going to have, because the cost of modeling and texturing and rendering, animating, rendering, rigging, all the things you have to do to get a CG creature on film is pretty high. You have 20 of those little characters, and you can easily spend $1 million before you even see one in a frame.
You have to strike a balance. Your first thought is that you're going to want to see demons in every single frame of the movie. And then you think about it a bit more and you realize that if there's going to be a scene in which there are 40 extras, you're actually also going to have, in theory, 40 demons walking, running, flying, doing whatever it is that demons do. And that becomes terribly complicated, but more importantly, rather confusing and messy.
The reason the demon works on the page when we read the book is that I only draw your attention to it when the demon needs to do something or say something. Otherwise, we can forget it's there, and it doesn't clutter up the place, doesn't get in the way. But on the screen, if every character all the time had an animal with them, which had to be doing something, you wouldn't know where to look. Some of the time, they might be in someone's pocket, there might be a mouse or something, or they might be sleeping on the floor while you're talking to a friend. We don't need to see them all the time.
A lot of the actual inspiration came from Pullman and his books, but some had to be changed and re-scripted because, the practical side of, computer imagery, which there largely will be, takes over. It's easier to do smaller ones than bigger ones. Some are more photogenic and more endearing to an audience than others. So all of that sort of played into that, but it really was an interesting journey looking at all these crazy animals.
Early on, we have to figure out what these animals look like, so we go to reference photography and pick samples of, this particular sparrow has nice colorations, or this particular ferret, for example, has good markings that we want to use. But then there's a little bit more. We want to put, these guys are just a little bit different from the real thing. So we have what's called a maquette made, which is literally a sculpture that's made in clay, that's in 3 dimensions. Everyone can look at and see, yes, this is our character. And then it's actually taken and digitized in the computer for us to use as our model that we can rig and animate and move around.
We'll get this as close as we can, lighting reference, and then take it the rest of the way in CG.
The CGI people want references that are as close to the effect of a given lighting scenario on actual fur as they can get. Which means that someone makes a golden monkey by putting in the 10,000 hairs into a sort of a rubber maquette. And that is used as a reference for the CGI animators, so that their depiction of how the light in that particular environment hit the fur of our imaginary creatures was as realistic as possible.
One of the challenges when you're shooting a live action film that has digital characters is how do you make sure that there's space for the characters? How do you make sure that people perform in a way that will work later when the characters are put in. So we have different things. We have these green sausages that weigh about the right weight, and we have stuffies. Stuffies are really just a fancy term for a stuffed animal that can be a plush toy to something that the props department built that's actually the right shape with the right amount of fur and all that. It also helps inform the cameraman to make sure he leaves enough space for us to put our digital character in. It's all to give both inspiration to the actors. You know, when we rehearse a scene, we'll say that you know, there's an animal sitting on your shoulder, and just, you know, help guide them through where different things are. So when we put our digital magic in, it all works.
As though Pam were in there. A lot of stuff was new to me because I've never really done a computer effects heavy movie. So it was as new to me as it was to Dakota. And it's all about recreating in the mind of the actor the correct response to something that's not going to be there when we're shooting it, which will be replaced by the you know, CGI creatures. And there seem to be about 10 different ways that we're going to go about doing it, from having Tommy, our puppeteer, actually there with some kind of stuffed animal, to the old green ping pong ball on a stick, to nothing at all. And if I said I understood it any more than that, I'd be lying.
We work out the movement of the demon first, and it'll be me learning how to simulate that movement, and for Lyra to be able to have the eye line to be following that movement, but without me actually being there. So yeah, I'm going to do the movement for Pantaleimon and the movement for some of the other demons. I'm going to be doing some of the voices whilst filming. So basically, I'm going to be the relationship between Lyra and Pantaleimon. So I need to give life to these puppets. The inventiveness comes first, and then I think you strip it down. And yeah, then you hand it over to the CGI people, and they will make it look great.
The camera's going to be moving as he's coming up. Oh, we talked to Tommy about, you know, what the demons are like. So when Tommy does his performance, it's to convey that to the actors. If a demon's on somebody, we've got to make sure that the actors have some knowledge of how big it is. And we have all sorts of these little gadgets and gizmos, everything from, you know, weighted things that can be flung in on fish hooks to, you know, something as simple as a little safety pin on a fishing line that can tug the clothes in the right way. Just, you know, we want to look ideally as if the demon is there without being there, with all the things like clothes moving and them responding to the weight in the right way.
We work hand in hand with Tommy, our puppeteer, and closely with Mike Fink and Bill Westenhofer. And we have to help the animator to get the right position and where the demon will move to on the body or across the floor to make sure that the eye lines and the correct animal is in the right position. Basically, I think we cover enough to cover 50, which is some stuffies, some actual taxidermed animals, and some just some rough shapes that we put a pelt or an imitation fur cover over to represent the corresponding demon to the actor.
Shooting is going really well. We seem to be getting everything we need. There is very complicated stuff in this show. We're essentially creating an animated movie with live action. So we have characters that have to interact with our principal cast, and that's complicated. But the actors are wonderfully adept at figuring out where they have to look and understanding where their body has to be to accommodate the other character.
I remember doing hours and hours at drama school thinking, oh, this is useless. Where you pretend, you know, to be patting a dog, or you pretend to be finding the walls and picking up a teacup and drinking tea, and it's all imaginary. So it certainly is useful. You may think it's useless. It does help. I tell any actor, don't skip those mime classes.
Now you must learn to control your dim. It's much too wild.
It's such an important thing to the film that, you know, the bond between them, but then you're just like, well, no, I don't have a bond with this little thing. You don't know what to do with it, because if it were a real thing, you would like be looking at it and stuff, but you don't want to just look at a green blob, because it just feels silly. It's just like not something that you do, and so it's kind of hard to get used to.
Demons are people in a way, so the connection has to be quite kind of intimate and quite emotional. I mean, in a sense, a kid has as many advantages in terms of doing that because they're closer to the time when they played with imaginary animals, which I still do, but not many adults do. So whatever disadvantages came from Dakota not having been in a film before were far outweighed by the fact that her powers of imagination were still pretty active.
There was actually a cat which looked a bit like a cat. I was a bit grossed out the first time I had to hug the cat. I mean, I'm a vegetarian, and at the moment I'm refusing to buy like leather shoes and stuff. And so I was just like, oh great. And now I have to sit here with taxidermy cats and stuff. You could only hold it one way because it had nails sticking out of its feet so that they could screw it into the little platform. So when it was meant to be like moving in a shot, they just had it on this little robot platform and it would just go whizzing along. The rabbit was more funny though, because the rabbit kept falling off. They couldn't actually get the rabbit on, so they had to do like the stuffy passes about 3 times every time the rabbit had to move.
What are we gonna do, Pan? We've got to save Roger and Billy. We've got to save ourselves first. Where are we gonna go?
I think people's opinions as to how demons ought to sound will probably vary. Mine was that they sounded like people. So there's nothing particularly cutesy about the way demons sound. They don't have tiny squeaky little voices or anything like that. And in this case, Pan he ended up being played by Freddie Highmore.
This could be a bad idea. It's a good character to be playing. I mean, you're obviously a bit nervous because Pan's based on Lyra, and so, you know, you had to wait and see how Dakota had played the role of Lyra, and then, you know, so you think, oh, this is my opinion of how Pan goes, but when you see Lyra and you see that Dakota's done it so great, it was easier to do Pan based on that performance. General Oblation Board. G-O-B. It's fun doing it. It is like acting except in a studio, and instead of having the set around you, you're just looking at the screen.
Pan, it's her. She's running the gobblers.
We've got to get out of here.
We start with the recording and then we animate the face and the lip sync and the expressions of the demon, and we film the person reading the lines of the demon, and that is used as a reference by the CGI animators.
Rhythm and Hughes on this production worked on the demons. My role in production is to figure out from the start how we're going to realize the demons, how we're going to shoot it properly, and then once it's back in Los Angeles, directing the team of animators, lighters, and artists to realize the animals and have them pull off the performances for the film. We do a lot of reference gathering early on in production, and that can be anything from looking at nature books to ideally going out and shooting reference ourselves, in which we did for this production. And you can get in and get video of specific actions for our animators to animate to, and all that stuff is great for us to go later when we're building the character and rigging it to move and making sure it's doing exactly what the real animal would do. After that's done, we can give it to our animation team, who takes the character and walks it through and starts to add the performance.
When the model is built, we get to know the character and we can start stylizing some of the motion and figuring out what this character is all about, what this character likes to do. Does it like to walk straight, or does it shear a little bit? Does it pull its jaw to one side? Does it have a twitch on its left cheek? That kind of stuff. And so these motion tests really help us to get ready for when the plates and the shots come in. What you see here are our models. These are completely virtual models. They aren't scanned. They are completely sculpted by the modelers at Rhythm and Hughes, based on, sometimes on maquettes, most of the times just on photographs. And here we're just taking them through the motions just to see if we need to change some limb lengths, or if we need to have additional controls for muscles and that kind of stuff. So they're just a bunch of motion studies that we're doing with all these characters so that we have enough to create realistic performances.
After we have the base animation in there, we have all the hair to take care of. And there's a specialized team of people called technical animators who deal with every little hair, figure out how it bounces around and how they react in the wind or how they bounce off each other. And all that's dialed in just right. We can then take it to the final stage, which is lighting and compositing. That's where the person renders the fur, makes it look like it's in the right environment with the lights, etc. And the compositor then takes that layer, which is now, it's almost like the digital version of a cell they used to have in traditional animation. And you can now lay that down on top of the background. They'll add in things like shadows and reflections and all that kind of thing and composite it into a final product that is the resulting shot. From all the demon characters, the golden monkey was the hardest technical challenge. He's got a lot of hair that is long and flowing, and being a monkey, he's always kind of reaching around and moving his hand through the hair, which we have to deal with.
The golden monkey is a very long-furred creature, and then it's a small animal, so it actually has the ability to move around a lot. We were actually comparing the golden monkey to the work that we had done for Narnia, for Aslan, and in a lot of ways the golden monkey has been a lot more difficult simply because there is a lot more freedom of movement for the monkey. We have a lot of close-ups for this character, so we're working a lot on sort of some of this finer detail on the face. Even though he's a big part of this film, he actually doesn't have any dialogue. He doesn't actually speak, so all of his performance really needs to be conveyed through his face. So we kind of agonized a lot over the structure of his face and kind of the position of his eyes, width of the nostrils, thickness of the lips. You know, there's all these details really sort of got worked on quite a bit. It's been a little bit of a journey. There's actually one little comp here that the look development artist put together kind of to show sort of transition of the golden monkey from its very beginning to sort of where we end up now. There's a lot of wrong turns in here, and looking back on this is actually kind of nice because when we work on it day to day, we don't see the changes that are happening, and it feels very slow and incremental. But if we go back to something very early on, we can see exactly how far we've come.
The demons I'm most proud of from a technical side, I love both the golden monkey and Stone Maria are wonderful. The fur, the way the fur moves and the way they look, and the golden monkey is a joy to animate. Just with his personality, it's always that mischievous little guy. They're always a lot more fun to do. But honestly, Pan is my favorite. Pan is the most adorable character you're going to see. There's a shot early in the film where Lyra's looking through the projector in the retiring room, and Pan sticks his tongue up at her in big in frame, and it's bound to get a chuckle from the audience.
I think we've really succeeded. I think that they're beautiful. I think that the effects houses are doing amazing work, and that these are very alive, vivid characters in their own right. I think that readers of the books won't be disappointed, and I think that people who see the movie for the first time are going to see something that hasn't ever been done yet. Just in terms of the reality of these characters and their believability and the absolute conviction that you are looking at a person.
What is this?
This is a finely tuned precision piece of equipment that has been made by hand with a great deal of love.
What's it for?
I'll tell you the truth, all right? You don't always get the true answer, but here's the truth. I needed the master of Jordan College to give her something valuable. It didn't matter what it was. It could have been a diamond, it could have been a bottle of rose petal oil or something. But I thought of this intriguing idea of a thing that looked like a clock but wasn't. So that's it, you write that scene and off she goes. And then I have the problem of thinking, what the hell is this thing I've given her? What's she do?
It's an alethiometer. It's a truth measure. A golden compass. It enables you to see what others wish to hide.
It's kind of like the helping hand in a way. It kind of shows you what to do and where to go when you're lost.
It was made about 400 years ago. It was invented by a learned man in Prague in about 1600. And that's the history I invented for the alethiometer. And he used it as a means of asking questions of the universe in the way that astrology used to be thought of. You know, life is a mystery, but the stars, they've got an answer for us if we know how to read them. Every society, I guess, has had this way of asking questions of the universe in its past. And this was the one that was invented in Lyra's world. And the moment that I realized what it was that this thing did, I also knew something about how this story would end.
This lets you glimpse things as they are.
When I first met Philip Pullman in Oxford, he took us to a museum of mechanical pieces and said this is where he got the idea. And we kind of all wandered through it and looked at it, and it's bits and pieces of, 400 or 500 pieces of unique instruments.
I think that Pullman's world has a great mix of a sense of awe and wonder, but a real functionality to it. So I felt that we didn't want to sell the alethiometer based upon any kind of visual effect. So the first thing was to make it an object that actually worked, and the aim was to eventually get a machine that could in real time do what the alethiometer in the book does, which is to move with a kind of a sense of will that feels, if not human, like that of a being who's directing the motions of the needle.
One thing I do know, Lyra. You mustn't grasp at the answer. Hold the question in your mind, but lightly.
It started off that we were going to create the image that was on all of the book covers. And then there was a change in direction where we had to come up with something that, instead of looking like a compass, looked more like a pocket watch.
My role very early on was simply to research compasses, pocket watches, astrology, numerology, just imagery that may or may not lend itself to this particular device.
We came up with a silver pocket watch, which was stunning. And we looked at it and we thought, well, this is the kind of image we like, but we want to make it, again, a little bit more mystical. So the graphics girls came up with images. We overlaid those onto a puck, which was just a piece of plastic, to see what people thought of it.
Barry came up with this reference, and once this reference, which is an old clock from the 17th century, was validated by Chris and Denise, it was very good guideline. Chris wanted also very precise things like monument from Prague on the interior of the lead. Then we did another pass where kind of fade out the illustration, and then the dial comes toward us.
The alethiometer went through about 30 different incarnations, I would say, and it was just a big give and take.
It was just looking at images, bringing them into Dennis, showing Chris, and saying, what do you like? And eventually all the boxes were ticked and we were green lit, and away we went.
Well, how are you going to make it? That's it. That's the question to ask yourself. And on this film, we fought to set up a forge.
Most forges that do small pieces, you have to get in with their lead times. So if on a Friday we have something that we have to produce, and we ask them to make it, they say, sorry, we're closed for the weekend. Bring it in next Wednesday. So I need it for Tuesday.
Without the foundry here, without that tool, the compass wouldn't have been on set on time. But because of the engraving on the object, because we were down to 4 weeks manufacturing time, that was really scary, how we're going to do it. And that was really the biggest problem that had to be ironed out first of all. So we went to engravers who, it was a 3-month project for an engraver to engrave just one, where we needed, 6. So the way we did it, a friend of mine who was in the motions of buying a machine, a state-of-the-art rapid prototyping machine. So my first call was to see, A, if he can do it in time, and B, can he get the detail. This machine makes medical components. And what it is, it's a vat of liquid. It's like a state-of-the-art rapid prototype machine. It's a vat of liquid. And there's where the 2 laser points meet, reads off software. Where the 2 laser points meet, then it goes hard, and it literally rises out of the liquid. Instead of taking 3 months for an engraver, it took us, by the time we made the software, to draw it up in 3D, it was 2 weeks. And actually, rapid prototype, it was 2 days. It was the first thing that he was ever going to do on it, so he was on a learning curve. But it's the only real way of us producing it in 4 weeks.
It's like a drawing.
It's amazing. Thank God.
That was a big day for us. If we didn't actually have the pattern and it didn't work, then we were in trouble. So by then we were down to 2 weeks. So then we had 2 weeks to turn a plastic shape into like a full working prop. So then from there we cast it, we mould it, Then we cast it in wax. Then you can do a lost wax process.
Well, what I've got here are the moulds for the alethiometer. There's two halves. There's the lid and the body. So now all I've got to do is fill them with wax. I'll leave this for half an hour for the wax to cool off completely, and then we'll clean it off the top, take them out, open them up, and we'll see the alethiometer in wax. We'll assemble it onto a system of runners, which are basically sort of plumbing for the bronze to go in and out of this mould. And once we've done that, we'll build up a layer of ceramic shell, so it'll allow us to pour hot bronze inside it. Then you fire it, which removes all the wax and also vitrifies it. That's where the bronze is going to go in. It'll go in through the central runner there. It's called a runner that goes down the middle, and it branches off through these separate arms here and fills up each of these individual cavities, which each one contains an alethiometer. So I'll put that in the kiln. When I open the kiln, you'll see that there's some really intense heat, and it's quite up close. This is just heat reflective rayon, and it just prevents that initial blast of heat from getting through. The visor is exactly the same thing. It's got this metallized heat reflective coating. I have to look down into the pot when I'm filling it to check the level, find out whether it's got to temperature. And when you sort of peer over, without this, you'd have no face. Every time we do a pour, we're sort of expecting the unexpected. You have to, because you're dealing with such high temperatures. Anything can happen. Okay, that went pretty well. So we're going to leave them in the samba here until they're solidified. Take about 20 minutes to half an hour. At which point we'll drag them out, knock off the shell, and see what we've got. My heart was in my mouth, because I knew that if we didn't get it, we were going to have an awful lot of disappointed faces. Plus, we said we could do it, so we had to, and we did. We got 6 perfect alethiometers in the first pour, and they were just beautiful, absolutely the most beautiful casts I think I've ever seen. So it was a fantastic triumph.
We pulled out all the stops to get this alethiometer out of a forge produced in brass. We'd had 5 weeks of angst. Was this thing going to turn out? Was it going to look real? Was it going to look believable? The brass came out of the forge about 8 o'clock in the morning.
And I just thought, this is a beautiful thing. This is a thing of beauty. This is what an alethiometer looks like.
That was 2 weeks before we started filming, and that was the icing on the cake, because we'd spent quite a lot of money and time building the forge, getting the health and safety right, and we just had to ensure the product was first class, and it was.
I saw it come back from the foundry, and I looked at this thing and I went, holy cow. It's beautiful, but there's so much missing from it.
It comes out pretty rough, in a pretty rough state. This one's a halfway house really between being cleaned up, but if you go too far, you'll lose all your symbols. But losing some symbols is good, because we want it to be quite, it's been touched over many hundreds of years, so it needs a bit of wear on the back.
We went through, I can't remember how many motors to get this to work. First of all, it's too noisy. Then the stepper motor was too stepped, in that you could see the needle movement. It was also a time where we were contacting people in Italy in late July, early August, and Italy was closed down because they were on holiday for the summer, so we couldn't get the motors from them.
So therefore you have to go to, that's the reason why I went to Sweden. We got similar motors from Sweden, but they were too big. So it's literally scan the planet to find these motors that we need. That's what we did and find. But again, it was all in a 4-week period.
As I say, I can't remember how many motors. It just seemed to go on and on and on. But the guys pulled all the stops out, remachined the gearing, and it worked.
So all these little tiny gears we've had to have etched, and then I've had to bond 2 layers together, and then actually cut every tooth by hand with a razor saw, and then play around for like a week just to make gears which will mesh together and not lock up. It's quite complex work. We have to get it all very tight and accurate as well, so we can't have it too loose, otherwise the needle won't go to the same place every time. It's got to all be very tight. But touch wood, at the moment nothing's gone wrong, but I wish you hadn't made me say that, so it's going to explode in my hand any minute, isn't it now?
It's obstacles, problems that you have to get over that problem before you can go on to the next process, and then you've got to get over that problem.
The illustrations, we had some sideballs on that. To create everything in colour and to make it look more magical, we had to find enamelers, silversmiths, etc. to get the dial made. People came back to us with 3 months lead times, and we said, oh no, we film on this in 6 weeks' time or 5 weeks' time. And then someone came along with Keith.
I had a phone call from one of the production girls, and I think they've got my number through one of the jewel houses in New Bond Street, which most of my work sort of goes to.
He said to me, well, I can produce an image of a pheasant on a button. And you kind of query that and you think, you can get all the colours, you can get the iridescence. He said, yeah, that's easy. He said, I'll tell you what, I'll send you a set. So he sent me a set, and we looked, and you kind of almost in disbelief, because you're looking through a microscope and you think, God, this guy can do this.
From that, they realised that I could fulfil the criteria, as it were. So, yeah, it was good. Then I started to get some bits of artwork. I think this was the first one, and I had to do a small sample. From this, it needed to reduce down to 7mm, which is quite tiny. What you've got to work out is how to work and hold the thing, because when you're painting one figure, you don't want to then stick your finger or wipe off something else you've done. So logistically, you've got to work out how to work at it. Sometimes you're working upside down, simply because you can get in easier with the brush. I use fine sable hair brushes because they're a better quality. And sometimes I thin them down with a razor blade, so you get a really fine point, so you've only got a few hairs left on there. I mix it up on my nail, and then it's the right consistency, and it just stays, you keep reaching over to the palette. Sometimes you can only get so much detail in because of the thickness of the brush, you know, a few hairs, and you've got to be able to control it. But no, I'm used to working in miniature. It's just how small you can go and how much detail they want. The only trouble is I'll probably never see the finished item until I see the film, probably.
There are 6 different versions of them for various different purposes. The most sophisticated one of them is programmable to the extent that I was able to play, as it were. I was playing the dust. I was playing the force that moves the alethiometer's needles, and I could program in the needle's movements in a way that seemed quite organic, that would be stored by a chip within this functioning alethiometer, which also had gears that turned, it had a clockwork that turned inside, and really feels like an actual device.
The final product was great. I mean, there's no chance this isn't going to work, and it obviously has.
I was really like, wow. It actually felt real. I really wanted one, and yeah, I've got one now. They gave me one as a leaving present.
It's a beautiful looking object. You can play with it, and it's beautifully realised. It's a wonderful piece of work.
There have been various depictions of alethiometers on book covers and fan art and this and that. Many of them very good, but I don't think any of them would really stand up to this one. I think this is the alethiometer.
The Lara that you saw on the desk.
I love what she does with the
yes,
too.
And that's and the cabbage.
The inside is beautiful.
Yeah.
Ruth Myers played such an important role because Ruth was inspired, of course, by Philip's books. She was a huge fan, but she also knew Dennis Gassner, who was designing the movie, and I think when she saw what he had done, some of the concept art for this movie, she felt she had to have it. And so she did some early work. She created this absolutely magnificent book of drawings. And I think it showed the genius of Ruth Myers.
When I went to interview with Chris and Dennis, I had been pressured into doing some drawings before the interview, some boards, which I've never done in my life. It's really like going into an interview and taking your clothes off, essentially, because you don't know what people want and you're showing them what you think it should be before you know what their view is. Extraordinarily, my vision was not 100 miles away from Dennis's, so it made life much easier that I came in with some sense of vision that was very close to his.
The clothes have an ethereal quality, you know, not from this world, very flowing, you know, see-through, quite sexy.
When you're getting a costume as good as this, you're informed already. you're informed about your character.
It's just a great look. It's good to wear, and you feel good in it. It does its job.
When the full costume is on, it gives a wonderful sense of who you are. You have to stand up in it. You have to kind of present yourself in it, and it's very intricately designed.
With Myers, who's done the costume, has created sort of. It's really strange, and I know this it kind of may sound like I'm just saying this for the sake of this interview, but it's really being imagined how I imagined it.
The department's very big indeed. It's the biggest, certainly by a very long way, the biggest department I've ever had. We have 8 standbys looking after the stuff on set. We have 8 in the craft room, which is a lot for a craft room. We've had 12 people making. I have an assistant, a supervisor, and a wardrobe mistress, so there's 4 of us too. So it's a very big department, but then there've been an incredible amount of costumes that have been made. We're reckoning somewhere around the neighbourhood of 700 to 750, which is extraordinary. But the nature of the film was such that it was much more exciting to be able to do it that way than to rent things or find any other ways around it.
There's not one space big enough in Shepperton to be able to put everything in one room, so we're sort of squidged in here and there. But these are all the fitted and shot-on costumes on the crowd. So every costume you see in here has had a body in it. And Ruth does every single fitting, even if it's crowd, herself. She does every single one.
Normally, this is something you pass off to other people and you just check Polaroids and make sure that the colours are right and that they're going in the right way and pop in and out. But I've been so obsessed by this film. There isn't one person on that set that I haven't personally tied their shoes or done their belt.
Oh my golly gosh. Ruth had so many problems to solve. We were shooting on sound stages in probably the hottest summer and fall that the UK had in 35 years without air conditioning. And she had these very heavy fabrics, and she assembled a team that she knew could execute on her vision. She also was so mindful of Dakota being new to this and gave her clothing that was perfect for Lyra, but that Dakota could be comfortable and relaxed in. And so, she was one part great artist, designer, psychologist.
We had a lot of time with Dakota because it's been very, very important to make sure that she feels absolutely right and that when she puts her things on, she loves them and she knows who she is in them.
Clear the set, please, in the background.
I really like the costumes. I think they're really good.
What's your favourite?
The one I'm in for about 3 seconds, which is like a green dress. I'm in it when I do the restaurant with Mrs. Coulter.
Her beginning in Oxford, it does have sort of slight sort of pre-Raphaelite overtones, which I think very much is in the book. And then when she gets to London, she then takes on Mrs. Coulter's world and transforms her in the reflection of Mrs. Coulter. And originally, when she moved in with Egyptians, I had her changing quite slowly out of that, so that I'd kept a bit of Mrs. Coulter's world as we started off her journey with Egyptians. But funnily enough, the more I worked with Dakota, the more it felt as though she would want to get rid of those clothes immediately. So she becomes Egyptian very, very quickly.
If I had to walk down a hall like that as Nicole, forget it. It's terribly embarrassing. I think I remember whispering to Chris going, oh, I feel very shy. But Ruth Myers, who does the wardrobe, she's helped me so much with all of the costumes and she really thinks in terms of character.
I think the idea of Nicole starting the film gleaming and sparkling and showing her body so beautifully. Yes, I'm very proud of that outfit. I think that outfit pretty well says everything. But Mrs. Coulter was easy because she's described as being the most glamorous woman in the world. So, you just let your mind go into what you consider would be the most glamorous woman in the world. And with me, it was very much that sort of Greta Garbo image, that sort of Marlene Dietrich, super, super, super glamorous, and Nicole fits that so easily and beautifully. But dressing Nicole is not like dressing anyone else at all. I mean, she's just the perfect figure and the perfect shape. She's the perfect woman to dress.
Mrs. Coulter, are you familiar with the prophecies of the witches? Beryl Reid always used to say, when you've got the shoes, you've got the character. But to a certain extent, it's true. I mean, for example, I've got these shoes on. They're sort of flamenco shoes, and they make you mince in a certain way, which is really immediately gives you a certain feeling. There's a lot of rubbish talked about acting in terms of psychological motivation, all of this sort of stuff. Actually, when it comes down to it, it's just a physical sensation. You think, oh, that feels good, I've got that right. And necessarily, a costume is a very important part of that physical sensation.
This is a 10-gallon hat, perhaps even several more. How do you feel about that?
I love the hat.
Excellent.
You have questions about the hat?
No, it's a big one.
It's a big hat.
It's a big one, but it feels
you want
right
a bigger
to you.
hat? Was that it?
No.
Sam is the part. I mean, there's no dressing. It's just that's what Sam is, and he knows it too.
It'll be warm up there.
The first fitting he came to, he brought his hat and he said, I know we can't use my hat because I know you're going to need two of it. This is the hat I want.
This hat came from home.
I said, well, fine, we'll send your hat to the hat maker and get the hat maker to make you the replica hat. So his hat maker made two hats, which were the replica of his hat, but he couldn't quite be parted from his hat.
I've had it sitting at home for almost 30 years. Never worn it on a job, so I was happy to wear it. Happy to get a chance to wear it.
Yeah, quite excellent.
Daniel needed a certain look as Lord Asriel, but it had to be absolutely perfect for Daniel Craig, for his physique, for the way he wanted to move, for his performance.
Lord Asriel were the costumes I was most confused about because I think that I started off seeing him almost as a Victorian hero. But when they cast Daniel, I know Daniel, I'd worked with him last year, and I knew that this wasn't right for Daniel. When he came in, we talked, and he was struggling, I was struggling, and as I was struggling, I said to him, this is really very strange because I bought this piece of fabric for you, and I don't know why I bought it, really. And I produced the tweed that we made the suit of, and we both looked at it and went, yes, of course. From the moment we had that, there was no question that he shouldn't go on then to look like Scott of the Antarctic or some wonderful, heroic explorer.
In that period, all those guys who were going up to the North Pole or to the Antarctic were kind of wearing all sort of, like tweeds and leather boots. And then so you look at the stuff that people wear today, which is, this like Gore-Tex or whatever it is to keep warm. You can't imagine how people actually managed, but they did.
I just wanted him to look heroic. In the real sense of heroic, I mean, not in a sort of cape and top hat, but the sort of reality that you do see when you look at those photos of people in the Arctic. The Egyptians, too, I wanted to look heroic. Heroic has been very much a word that I've been playing with in my mind ever since I started this. And the witches, that have been very interesting, because originally the sort of idea of the witches, and indeed the early drawings I did, were, again, very pre-Raphaelite. More like sort of pre-Raphaelite heroines or pre-Raphaelite ideas of fairies, and none of them seem quite right. And what we now have is a very, very strong version of that. Seraphina is very much more like Boadicea, a sort of warrior, than she is in the sort of wispy, flippity-gibbet sort of person that flies through the air. I mean, she'll fly through the air with great strength.
It's quite interesting because, witches wouldn't wear any heavy clothing or shoes because they wouldn't be aware, they wouldn't sense the world around them. So it tells a lot about the character.
The designs look terrific on film. The costumes are spectacularly good. They're all absolutely right.
One of the great things about the books is that it doesn't tell you anything about the costumes. So essentially you're getting all those clues without it saying, and she was wearing a pink dress, or her skirt came up round her knees, or anything like that. So it gives your imagination full range, and it makes it much easier because you're not tied into anything. When Philip Pullman came round the first time, and I was terrified. I was beyond terrified. But when he came round and looked at the costumes, he was very quiet. He was with his wife. He went from room to room, and in those days we had a lot starting. And at the end I said to him, "Are these all right for you?" And he said, "These are beyond anything I could have imagined. This is what I would have wanted, but I could not have got this far." And I mean, that, you can't beat that. I mean, that's the best compliment I've ever been paid in my whole life.
Well, Oxford is a very beautiful place, obviously. The buildings are lovely. They're a real mixture of the medieval and the classical and the modern, and it's a world full of odd little corners that look intriguing and interesting, and doors that seem to open into, could be another world, who knows. So Oxford is physically very attractive to a storyteller. The other thing is it's only 2 miles down the road, and I didn't have to go.
Plays a very, very central role in the foundations for this story. And Philip is part of the fabric of Oxford, so it's great to be here in this beautiful setting. Many of the locations that we're shooting in here were places that Philip wrote and that inspired this particular story.
The first time I came here to Oxford, it was with Philip Pullman, and Philip was really our guide. He knows the college and city itself better than anybody. And so I let him kind of give me the tour, and through the tour I started to digest all that information and started to create the look.
It's looking great. Yeah. This wonderful building you put up over there.
Well, yes, we did. No.
There isn't a Jordan College in our world. So Jordan College is a mixture of elements of the college I went to myself, which is Exeter College, and elements of much bigger and richer and grander colleges like this one. And, it's a mix and match thing. I picked all the best bits from the best colleges and put them together in Jordan and told readers of the book that it was the biggest and grandest and richest of all the colleges. And I suppose that's true of Christchurch in our world, which is a very good reason for filming here.
The whole cast and crew, when we came here last night and we got out of our cars and got settled in, took a walk along the streets of Oxford, and the moon was full over these buildings, and it was magical. So we think that this is going to be a terrific week of shooting.
We are working in 3 beautiful colleges, Christchurch and Queen's, which is where my dad went to college as it happens, and Exeter, which is Philip Pullman's old college. So there's a bit of sentimental appeal to it all. As a matter of fact, Dakota's room the exterior of Dakota's room in Exeter is Philip Pullman's old room, his old window.
When I was an undergraduate, we did used to climb out of, I had a set of rooms right at the top, and we used to climb out of the windows there and into the gutter. There was a big wide old stone gutter, and we used to crawl along there and climb over the roof and so on. I wouldn't dare to do it now, but young and stupid and maybe with a few drinks inside, it felt less dangerous somehow. And so of course I gave Lyra that experience of clambering over the roofs.
Well, the plan was to use Oxford as the basis for the world that we're creating, and we will be doing some modification. We will be doing some unique things to Oxford itself to create our Jordan College. The groundwork will be done certainly from Oxford, and then we'll be using some small elements from Greenwich and other parts of Europe. It's a hybrid of this type of architectural style.
The phrase I used for Jordan College in the novel was it had an air of jumbled and squalid grandeur. And I envisage as being in the same place, roughly, that Exeter College is in Oxford, right in the heart of the city. And it was a useful storytelling thing for Lyra because it gave her a place to be from. I'm Lyra from Jordan College. She's boastful that she belongs to this college. You know, she shows off and boasts to all her little ragamuffin friends about the greatness of the learning of Jordan College.
Don't you know what this gate is? It's the back door to your stupid college. So?
There's a curse on this gate. You Egyptians ought to know that.
Our Jordan is actually the wealthiest college. It's beyond any of the colleges that are here now. And so it's creating a heightened view of the wealth of the university, which obviously plays into the story itself. That's why Lord Asriel is seeking his fortune through them. And so we want to play it up as grand as we can.
Did you get the money you needed? Are you going north again?
Yes, the College Council has defied the magisterium. I'm leaving immediately.
Lyra's world in Oxford is steeped in history and she lives in a very grand college, but is comfortable. So the colour at the beginning of the movie is sort of rich, golden, warm tones. So obviously that's reflected in the colour of the buildings themselves. But because we're in a parallel world, even the night, and we'll be in a harvest moon, which is a golden moon as opposed to a silvery blue moon. So rich and gold is the Oxford world.
We were looking for a quadrangle to have our sky ferry in, and the docking station here, and it's this great, it's very symbolic of the juxtaposition of something familiar and something from Lyra's world in it. And I think that when you see that sky ferry, which is now just some orange balls over there, docked here in this beautiful quadrangle, it's going to be a feast for the eyes.
Oxford is a mood of grandeur and history. We wanted to create something that was sensitive to the book and to the script to create that world. So Philip was really our guide.
The point about Oxford colleges is that they have been lived in and worked in continuously for 500, 600, 700 years, some of them. So the bits are always falling down and having to be replaced. And that's what I love about Oxford. It's such a mixture of the old, the new, the strange, the ordinary, the everyday, the mysterious. You know, that's Oxford.
You know, he started it all, so we're really just trying to realize it. From his point of view, I think the words on the page are wonderful in the mind, but then when you have to deal with the reality of creating it, that's another matter. And I think the fact that we've actually created something that I think that's unique through his words is really the fun part for him, I think.